In case you're not awake yet, I want to appreciate all of you being here. I think it's a very, very important beginning of a meeting for our city as we're actually at the point where we're moving to the next level, and it's going to take some cooperative work of all of us to try to figure out how we can handle the growth that we have, handle the financial responsibilities that we have. And if I was going to pick a team, I wouldn't pick a team that could match each one of you here today. So I think that's wonderful. Clay put out a memo that I don't know whether all of you had a chance to read this, but it was a good introduction to our budget. I think it set the tone, sort of reminded you of what the city's about, what our responsibility is, and what are the things that we need to do individually and as organizational elements of our community. I thought it was very good, Clay. I appreciate that. I've read it a couple of times, and every time I read it, I picked up some more. Well, let's move into our agenda. Let me formally open our public safety building hideaway budget process this morning. New business. I'll ask Clay to pick it up from there.
Good deal. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members, for your extra time on this Saturday. And thanks for got a lot of staff members here, obviously, who are very interested in the proceedings. And they're really the ones that put together the nuts and bolts and the entries that make a budget possible. And they deliver the work every day for us all. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Just a couple of real quick logistical items. We always need the council, but today we need all of y'all all the time because we're at the bare minimum for a quorum, and we've got built in some breaks and some other, discussion points within the presentations rather than just waiting at the end for trying to do all of it. So we'll try to be conscious of that, but if anybody needs to take a break, that's cool. We just need to, we'll lose the quorum, so we need to break the meeting momentarily. And then I also understand that at least a couple members have hard stops at noon. So from our side, we'll be able to get through the presentations. This is the introductory meeting for the budget for the city for the FY18. We really kicked this off in February with the early budget input, and we're constantly providing you updates, which you scrutinize and on progress. So we actually look forward to this as an opportunity to share some of the things that are accomplished and are coming up for the next year. With that, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to make the presentation from the podium here.
I do.
So when we're doing a budget, at least the transmittal, is that working? Yes. Hello. All right. So when we're doing the budget, I think it's a lot easier to build the budget program around some sort of a theme and something that ties things together. There's a lot of obviously numbers and performance measures and so forth, but it really sung to us this year talking about purpose, why we're here, what we do, and the end results in mind. And the quotes that you see up here are actually from our own staff. We conduct each summer a series of road shows with our employees where we invite them to, we share a lot of information. This year we made them work a little bit and asked them to share what they thought the purpose of the City of Pearland organization was. And as I said in that letter and as you see up here, our staff is very keen and aware of our higher purpose. They know that we're here for building community, a safe place that's sustainable, that people want to live in and invest in, an attractive community, safe community, et cetera, et cetera. So these things really cut across any departmental lines, and they also, I think, cut across and encourage us to work with others in the community, other neighborhood groups, agencies, governmental partners, homeowners associations. Everybody needs to come together to achieve these things. And so whenever we're talking about a project or a program, I think it's important to try to think about our purpose and why we're here. So getting right into it, taxable value is something that we obviously pay a lot of attention to. It drives our property tax revenue. which is the sole source for our debt service and major source for our general fund operations. This year is a little different in the recommended budget that we sent out to you. We waited for the certified value. If you recall, in the past, we've worked off the preliminary value, and then maybe a week or so later, we get the certified value, and we scramble around a little bit. But we decided we wanted to wait, and that came in at the 11th hour on Friday before we put out that budget. And probably it's a good thing. It shortchanged a lot of confusion because the numbers that came back, although the totals were similar to what we saw in the preliminary, the components of that were quite different, and the calculations that go into that. And so we worked hard with the folks at Missouri County Appraisal District and to try to understand what went into that, and you'll see some of the implications of that later. But on the aggregate, the city's taxable value, again, increased substantially, up to $8.1 billion net of the Shadow Creek TERS district, another $2.5 billion for the TERS itself. So these are important big numbers, and they show a community that's vibrant, growing, continuing to see reinvestment, and most importantly, the existing properties that are on the ground continuing to hold and grow in their value. At a high level, the budget that we have on the general fund is a balanced budget. We've got recommendations that put us in for a general fund ending balance just above the minimum policy. We were able to maintain what we started out FY17 in terms of streets and sidewalk investment, and the people side of things driving a lot of the expenditure costs. I mean, that's just the reality of our kind of organization and a service delivery organization. So on the people side a little bit, we do have included in here a 2% cost of living across the board effective in October. On the general fund side, that's about $900,000, and then also another $170,000 on the civil service to recognize that step increases. We did complete and present to you, meeting before last, I believe, the compensation classification study. We're going to use that as a guide going forward, and in this budget, we were able to recommend beginning to get after implementing that with a 95% of market implementation into the pay plan. That was a $464,000 expense in the general fund. We also have monies in the multi-year future for future increases, and we were committed to probably in February when we go back for an early budget input, taking another look at that, the financial implications, and developing a plan so that we can keep that current and keep it on our minds and make sure that we're not, as much as possible, slipping any farther behind. In our budget, it is public safety majority, 54% for public safety kinds of functions, about $42 million. We have new positions in the police department, includes 2 officers, telecommunications operators, 911 operators, and then jailers. So that's consistent with the Berkshire and also consistent with our police leadership emphasis on making sure that the officers themselves on the street have the support that's critical, that they know where to be in the right places and have safety in terms of information, and then also allows them, our officers, to be out on the streets and interacting with the public as much as possible. On the fire side, we're planning to move forward with continuous onboarding with additional firefighters. Rather than trying to staff up, we learned a lesson from the last time when we opened up Fire Station 4 and hired a lot of new firefighters at the same time and trying to bring them on and train them. It was just a very big challenge. We've got money in this budget for new Fire Station 8 and I believe Fire Station 7 as well to begin that planning down the road. But we need additional personnel just to maintain operations, to try to reduce some of the overtime expenses and some of the mandatory that we're keeping an eye on. And so we'd like to begin a continuous onboarding beginning in the second quarter with 3 new firefighters and doing the same each quarter thereafter. We also have replacement equipment, vehicles, as you see here, across public safety. So on the revenue side, sales tax is actually the single largest operating revenue, and we've got had that pegged in at 4% in this operating budget. That's 27% of the general fund revenue. We sent a memo out yesterday. When we started to put the budget together, the months that had come in at that point were performing better to budget. We had a slow month the month before last, and this last report we just got day before last was also either right at or below the same month last year. So that 4%, I wouldn't want to bet the house on. We've given you some numbers on what that implications are if that were to come in a little bit lower. We just need to keep an eye on that, if nothing else. And so that's something else that we got to keep in mind going through this budget process. And then the Pearland Economic Development Corporation, their sole revenue is from another half cent, and that brings them just under $11 million per year. On the property tax, back on that side, the rate that's been included in the recommended budget is at 0.68, 25 cents for operations and 43 for debt. That's another decrease, slight decrease from last year, but that's 3 years running that we've been able to decrease the overall city rate. That brings about $20 million to the general fund and 34 to the debt service fund. So because of the valuations and the calculations and so forth, that does bring an additional 8% revenue that we're able to work with. And then the property tax revenue itself, we can get into the specifics of the weeds of that, but the rollback rate that we get from the county, from the state mandated calculation, it's actually higher than our current rate. So there is an option that we could, as we've had to, last year we exceeded the rollback rate. The year before that, we were at the rollback rate, which you would expect with a growing city like we are. But the rollback rate is actually higher than our existing rate. So again, that's based upon those certified values that we got, and the recommended rate is at half cent below that. So there's a little bit of opportunity or freeboard, if you will, for movement in that from the rollback rate. The debt service rate is reduced 1 cent. Again, the growing tax base. We haven't had significant new issuances, and we're able to spread that out over a little bit. If we were to go at the what the states looks like they're going to start calling a no new revenue rate, currently they call effective rate, we wouldn't be able to do any supplemental items that are included in the recommendation, and we'd have to drop down the employee COLA from 2% just to 1%. That's pretty impactful for us. And this table, which is in the budget, summarizes that in terms of the different rate scenarios, comparing and what those are and what the revenue does. We're at the green there in terms of what the recommended budget is built upon. Purple rollback rate, and the black number 1 column is the effective rate. As far as what the city rate does to sample tax bills, we've used these last 2 years, and we took a sampling just randomly of 10 different tax bills across town. And the one that's in boxed, for that particular example, this homeowner would pay just under $2,000 for city property taxes, and that'd be $176 for the year increase from the prior year. And in this example, as with several of them, gets complicated, but the value from previous years, which was over 10%, essentially gets banked, and that is taxable when it comes in below. So this particular example and the other ones were showing conservatively how and realistically how those values are still going up 10%, even though their single year valuation may not have gone up that much. And then another example shown here, and this one is a valuation under 10% at 6.8%, and that shows they would have a $121 increase from the prior year, about $10 a month. And then there's also on the far right, there's a senior example. The senior freeze is an option, and that freezes the actual taxes that get paid. So that's a positive for them, and that's only $200 for the year, and that would be no change from the prior year. Switching over to CIP, we've got a very important and aggressive necessary capital improvement program, about $500 million in the 5 years. The vast majority of that is for our water and sewer utilities to upgrade and expand those. Prime example being the surface water treatment plant. You can also point to the Reflection Bay wastewater treatment plant that is under construction right now. Those are all repaid by users of the system, not on the tax bill. And then we do want to make note, and a lot of people are saying, nationally, that this is a good time to be doing investments with in other places, I don't think so much here in Houston, lower construction costs, but certainly lower interest financing costs to be able to do that. And then the rest, we do have a lot of road mobility projects in the CIP. We opened up Bailey Road this week to 4 lanes, which is a big positive. We've got in the future McCard Road and a lot of different mobility road improvements across town to get us a road network that meets the needs of this big population. And then as far as maintenance, we have that $1 million for street rehab and another $600,000 for sidewalks. You can see the numbers there. And it sounds like a lot of money, but it's a big city and a lot of needs. We have a large backload of sidewalk replacement requests that we're not able to meet. For example, if you do the numbers and take the indexes, they'd suggest closer to $4 million for annual street and sidewalk recapitalization. So somewhere between where we're at and closer to that $4 million would be the ideal, but this is where we're at as of today. Looking out on the debt service side, we did work with our financial advisors and ran some numbers and made some estimates based upon projections for future debt issuances, and you can see those run out there. That shows the 0.43 on debt. Projections we have show that we could keep that for at least another year. And then, if these projections were to come true, that would have to increase 2 cents for at least a couple years. The big caveat to this is this has very conservative, based upon historical assumptions for valuation growth. We've exceeded those by and large last few years. So even if the valuation comes in 1% or 0.5% more than that, it's a big number that would be able to moderate those debt service rates. And the other piece of that is the mandate for setting the debt service rate from the appraisal district. That factors into that and how the rate gets set. So before I turn it over, I just want to close again. It's been a pleasure working on this budget with our finance and budget team in our office and all the staff here. They do come to work every day thinking about Pearland and making it a better place, making their lives for their citizens better. And we're committed to working with you on this budget and then executing that in the coming year that starts October 1. So turn over to John McCarter for some more meat of it.
Well, first of all, good morning, Mayor and Council. As Mr. Pearson mentioned, my name is John McCarter. I have the pleasure of serving as Budget Officer here with the City of Pearland. Before we dive into some of the nuts and bolts of the budget, I just wanted to recognize some of the staff that are here. First of all, my fellow presenters, you heard from Mr. Pearson in the introduction, but we also have Ms. Neely Walker, who's our Senior Budget Analyst. She'll be talking about the Water and Sewer Fund a little bit later. In her regular job duties, she also works with Mr. Upton, who's our other presenter today, our City Engineer. On CIP, she also supports our public works, capital projects, and a lot of our internal service departments. Not here with us today is Shmira Jagrup. She's our budget analyst. She handles all of our personnel budgeting. Also, 3 of our 4 largest departments, that's police, fire, and parks and recreation, in addition to some of the smaller departments. Also wanted to recognize Ms. Cynthia Pearson and Mr. Rick Overgaard, who lead our finance department. We talk a lot on the budget side about what we want to spend our money on, but the property tax and the debt service, which is kind of the backbone of everything that we do, comes from these guys, and we just want to appreciate the work that they do. Last and especially not least are the rest of city staff we have here today. We made it a point this budget process to engage department heads and managers in the process a little bit more, which to them equated to more work on top of kind of running the city. So we just wanted to appreciate that and make sure that we recognize them for making time for us on this Saturday morning. We also want to recognize you, Mayor and Council, who obviously play the critical role over the next 2 months between now and when we adopt this budget of setting policy, giving direction, and ultimately, and most importantly by state statutes, adopting the tax rate, adopting the budget, and the fee ordinance, and in addition, by resolution, our capital improvement plan. I also want to recognize our city management team. Mr. Pearson, who is our city manager, has direct reports in police, fire, and information technology and development services. Mr. John Branson, who is our deputy city manager, leads a lot of our internal service departments, that being city secretary, human resources, finance, in communications, as well as the CVB, Parks and Recreation, and Municipal Court. Mr. Trent Epperson, our Assistant City Manager, who leads capital projects, public works, and engineering. Also important to recognize and lay a baseline for the way that we kind of look at the budget. The way that we talk about a lot of our policy is through the paradigm of our 6 strategic priorities. Each one of these represents a piece of what the city of Pearland does to ultimately serve the citizenry and the community. What we do as an organization to always be acting in the public interest and make sure that we're kind of covering all of our bases and representing everything it means to be the full-service city that we are. So getting to the budget, probably a logical place to start is to answer the question, what is a budget? First and foremost, it's a policy document. We talk about at city council meetings through discussion items and early budgeting about some very high-level things. This document represents the embodiment of that policy direction that you have given us, that we've discussed and laid forward in previous years and obviously looking forward to future years. That embodiment is a financial plan. You look in book 2 and you see a lot of numbers because we go account by account and take that policy and make it a reality. Budget drives everything that we do, and that financial piece is so important. Which brings us to the third component, which is this is an operations guide. After we adopt the budget in September, that gets loaded into our financial system and becomes kind of our go-to system when we talk about what are we spending money on, how are we investing our resources. It comes right out of this document. And last, and probably most importantly, is the communications device. Obviously, the internal piece of that is the operations, but we communicate externally with you, City Council and Mayor, as well as our citizens. We want to make sure that that's an accessible document so that we're being transparent as we go through the process and as we move throughout the fiscal year. Won't spend too much time on this, as Mr. Pearson hit on it in his introduction, but we did see an increase in taxable value this year. This chart shows us in billions, about a $5 billion increase since the 2009 fiscal year. Coming up here, important to keep in mind that about 23% of this total here is represented as TERS value. But bottom line, we did see another increase this year in our taxable value, driving our property tax revenue. Another important indicator is our new single-family housing permits history. We see the peak here, 2015, a reduction of about 236 last year ending. This year we're trending about 80 behind where we were at this point last year. It is important to caveat this, that although new single-family housing has driven a lot of the growth in Pearland, we have seen an increase in permit revenue this fiscal year and last year, even though we have seen a reduction in this specific type of permitting revenue. So development's happening, maybe just in different kinds. So getting into kind of the highlights and what we are looking to do this year. First, we start with safe community. Public safety represents our biggest investment in the general fund. That's no different with our funding highlights. It's $708,000 in total investment in the general fund. Public safety is our largest investment in our supplemental request as well. Our continuous onboarding is queued up for January. $400,000 brings us 3 firefighters per quarter starting in January throughout the end of the fiscal year. That's an effort to get us where we need to be with our current staffing and look ahead to future projects to make sure we have what we need looking into the future. Secondly is 2 police officers, kind of keeping with the trend to build that staff up year to year to keep up with our growth as a city. We do have 2 officers in the budget. The fiscally responsible piece really focused around staff this year. We have the 2% cost of living adjustment built in here. That's $912,000 to the general fund. Second related piece of that, supporting our employees and making sure that we're getting our positions where they need to be, is implementation of the compensation and classification study. We have built in right now 95% of market at mid-year, so that's coming in April. It's important to keep in mind that means that this is half of the total annual expense, so that remaining $550,000 citywide will be absorbed in the next fiscal year. That's FY19. What we do with the 95% of market plan, essentially we take our positions and get that range within 5% of the market. So that's the goal there. Obviously with the 2% cost of living, that's citywide, that hits every city employee, not every city employee, depending on where their position falls in relation to the market would see an increase in April. Looking at sustainable infrastructure, the first item on here, we have 2 infrastructure architects. Those are IT support specialists. We did something a little bit different this year. I mentioned in my opening remarks that we asked the department heads to do a little bit more this year. Part of that was getting them in a room for about 6 hours and walking through all 100+ supplemental requests, and then having them have homework to go and rank each one of those from 1 to, I think it was 75. The infrastructure architects were the #1 need identified. There were 3 requested in the budget. We were able to fund 2. The first of those is out of the general fund, focused predominantly on traffic, support of public works. The second would be to support SCADA in the water and sewer side of public works. The second piece on there, our asset management software. This is for the water and sewer fund component. If you remember way back 2 years ago, we brought a contract for our initial phase of the ERP, which did not include an asset management software, which was included in the initial kind of scope for that project. This represents a piece of that remaining public works on the water and sewer side. The grounds maintenance contract for water and sewer facilities, you see the asterisk here. We're showing a net amount here relative to the savings that we would see from shifting the employees that currently undertake this work to general fund, cost of $85,000, basically to create what's called a hot shot crew. That crew would essentially be able to take care of problem areas throughout the city in the right of way, respond to citizen complaints, and help with a little bit of a backlog we have in that area. Lastly, we see the PSB chiller. This is for the AC unit here at Public Safety Building. We talked a lot about HVAC at mid-year that came up as kind of emergencies. By providing this funding, we hope to avoid that next year. We are seeing this reach end of life, and if we're not able to fund this, we could see an emergency next year where it might wind up costing us a little bit more in the long run. So staffing highlights, obviously people are 70% of what we do in the general fund, close to that overall. If we look in the general fund for the fire, we talked about continuous onboarding. We talked about 2 new police officers. That's 5 new staff in general within the police department. We also have a senior planner coming on board for community development. Again, that's driven a lot by the development that we've seen citywide and really a need recommended from the Novak study, which was FY17, I believe we completed that. That was the #2 recommended supplemental request from our department heads. The last item there in the general fund are 2 mechanics. It's kind of an exciting item as we were able to do that really at a net zero cost to the city. We contract a lot of our work out currently. By doing it in-house with these 2 mechanics, we actually can reduce the line items in the fleet across the city. So although you'll see that increase in public works, you'll see an offsetting decrease elsewhere. So that was exciting to put that together. Looking at the enterprise fund, our surface water plant manager coming on midway through the year helps us gear up for that new facility coming on board in the future. Both the maintenance worker and the heavy equipment operator are kind of a tandem duo to work with our concrete truck, which is another supplemental request you'll see in there, to help support the distribution and collections division in the workload that they have. Lastly, PDC within their budget has a development manager being added on the last quarter of this current fiscal year. So kind of taking a step back and looking at our staffing highlights as a whole, in this specific chart we're talking about FTEs, that's full-time equivalents. Important note that that does not equate to head count. We're talking about with part-time people especially. Those are really dollar-driven, not people-driven costs. So we do see an increase of 22.5 over last year. That brings our total up to 757.5 for FY18 projected. We do see our largest investment there again as public safety, followed by public works and our parks and recreation as well. Another way of looking at kind of the same information is relative to population. We see here on the right-hand side is our population. Current estimates put us at 121,700. And this just shows our employees relative to our overall population. Important note, this is only those full-time staff positions, so this does more or less equate to headcount on a full-time side. So diving in the next section, we'll talk kind of in general terms about what we have in the general fund. First of all, let's start with revenue. As Mr. Pearson mentioned in his introduction, sales tax represents our largest revenue coming in at 26%. Also at 26% would be our property tax, driven by that increase in taxable value. Next is our charges for services, which represents 20%. The majority of that comes from our TERS admin fee, which is driven by our taxable value. We get 67% of that total back in through our charges for services classification. Sales tax history. So looking at this in our 2017 number, that is our projection. As Mr. Pearson mentioned, we are projected to come in a little bit under that amount this year. Looking at, since 2010, we've seen a healthy growth annually in our sales tax amount. At the end of fiscal year 16, we did finish about $234,000 over where we had anticipated. So we'll keep an eye on this as we move forward in this process, but that kind of gives you an idea of the last 7 years. General fund by function, as we mentioned, public safety represents 53% of what we do, remains our largest investment, followed by public works, general government, parks and recreation, community services, and transfers out to support other funds. Expenditure by category. No surprise here, 70% of what we do is salary and wages, represents our biggest investment, probably our most valuable asset being our people. Miscellaneous services would be second there. That's mainly contractual services that we contract out for third parties to help us out with the jobs we do every day. So kind of taking a step back, and what does this mean for the bottom line? We'll kind of go back to mid-year in the FY17 amended column. If you remember, we funded a number of mid-year allocation items to kind of take care of some one-time big-ticket things that we could knock out using fund balance. So that $8.8 million was a planned use of fund balance at mid-year, over and above what we had already planned in the FY17 budget. Looking at FY18, we are right around $78.5 million, both in revenues and expenses, which is a balanced budget, which is a big deal. Our revenues over expenditures, we're looking at adding $78,000 to the general fund balance, bringing our fund balance over policy to $290,000. Debt service fund obviously drives a lot of what we do here with the city. So the purpose of this fund is basically to support our obligations with debt. Obviously, we finance a lot of things, being the fast-growing city that we are. Probably the thing that sticks out most here is our large fund balance that we have here. We are projecting at the end of this fiscal year to have about $6.2 million. Probably a good question to ask is why don't we use some of that right now to defease debt, bring down the rate? The short answer is that in order for us to bring the rate to 0.43, we had to commit that money to cover if our revenue doesn't come in. So here we show it as unobligated, but that fund balance is technically obligated to the assessor's office. We did commit to have this amount of fund balance in order to get the debt service rate that we're at right now. Kind of zooming back out again, we see revenues over expenditures, about $482,000 we'll be adding to that fund balance this year. At mid-year, if we do see those revenues come in where we anticipate them to come, we can use this over policy amount to defease debt or do something else to pay off over the long term. So then we look at some of our kind of key indicators about where we're at with debt. So the top one here is our estimated direct debt outstanding as of the end of FY18. This is before new debt issuances, and it puts us at about almost $305 million. We use that to drive a lot of our calculations in terms of our performance measures. So the two that we have for debt would be net debt per capita, at right around $2,500, which is down from last year. And then our net debt to assessed value, which is 2.8%, again, down from last year. I'd also be remiss if we didn't recognize some of the efforts, again, led by Cynthia Pearson and Rick Overgaard, to defease debt. We did almost $1.5 million in debt defeasance in FY17. We paid off the balance of our capital leases, that's our short-term leases, within the debt service fund. If you look in the detail, we're not paying those this year, it's a cost savings. And then probably most importantly, we refunded $35 million worth of debt. If you look at that over 18 years, that's $4 million worth of savings to the city. Those are big deals, big items that we were able to do in FY17. So kind of the math behind how we get to our $305 million.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt. If you go back a slide, I'm just trying to follow along in the packet, and we're off like $15 million.
Yeah, in the initial slide that we published, we had an incorrect number for that estimated debt outstanding. So the $304 million, it basically wasn't, it had an estimate of new debt rolled into it, and we have to back that out, because that's not a good number.
Okay.
So,
right.
Sorry about that, though.
If any of those jump out, I don't know if there's any other changes, but if you could point them out if they jump out to you, I'd
Yes, sir.
appreciate it. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem, no problem. So again, kind of getting to how we got to that $305 million. We start with our current outstanding, our estimated beginning balance, if you will, which is $425 million, including both principal and interest after our debt requirement payments for next year totaling just under $28 million. That brings us to our $304 million, almost $305 million of principal outstanding for the end of next fiscal year. Again, not including new estimated debt. So looking at the debt service rate, obviously this drives our overall tax rate, very important piece of the puzzle. We are projecting, regardless of the scenario, that next fiscal year we will be able to maintain it at 0.43. Looking in the out years, we've outlined two scenarios here, one with the bond election, one without. Without any bond election passing or any new bond package, we would still be looking at an increase in FY 20 of 0.4425, going up to 0.45 in 21. With that bond election, we'd be looking at moving to 0.45 in FY 20 and 0.48 in 21. Again, this is should add an asterisk depending on where the taxable value goes. There's a lot of pieces that go into this, but just kind of a snapshot for the future years. So looking at property taxes, again, our second largest piece of revenue coming into the city means a lot to us. This slide kind of breaks out the components. We have the debt service component, which we just touched on in the last section, and then the O&M, which is kind of everything else that we operate off of in the general fund. Kind of the headlines here, we have a slight decrease this year. We're also seeing the O&M percentage as a total move up, which is a good thing. Looking at the sample tax bills for residential, just to be a comparison, Mr. Pearson outlined kind of just the city component of that. We started last year putting together these samples that include all the taxing entities. I believe we have about 12 in total. But you can see here, in this specific bill, the city makes up about 20% of the total, looking at about a $162 annual increase for this home that was initially valued at $249,000. Hit the homestead cap, so this would be a 10% increase to the $270, almost $4,000 in value. We talk about big numbers a lot. It's also important to recognize what that means to an individual taxpayer. And last, kind of our steadfast dollar split out. So with every dollar of tax revenue that a resident pays, what happens to it? Well, the biggest component of that is 63 cents that goes to debt service. Second biggest would be public safety, with the remainder of that going between general government, that's our internal services, public works, our parks and recreation, and our community services, that being communications and municipal court with some others. So with that, we're going to open this up for discussion.
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, as I mentioned at the outset, if you want to take a break now, or if you want to try to go through and share some initial feedback, we wanted to build in this rather than just waiting to the end, so.
Okay. Why don't we run this by us, run the loop on this?
All right.
Start with, Winnie, would you start this off and you'll be a good pace setter and a good model for the rest of us to follow?
All right. I guess we go back to clarify on the comp and class. So what we're looking at here is, in the base budget, is a 2% COLA increase, and then getting everybody doing the adjustment to 95% in mid-year.
The only caveat to that would be it's not everybody at mid-year. It's those that have positions that are outside of the, that are below the, outside 95% on the pay plan. So if your position is already at the market, there wouldn't be an adjustment at mid-year.
Right. So the adjustment gets everybody to 95%.
It gets the pay plan to 95%, yes, sir. And then the decompression.
Okay. All right. So when we look at the appendix back there where it outlines, I guess, proposed pay schedules, that's adjusted for the COLA, but it's not adjusted for the mid-year.
Yes. If I'm incorrect, somebody could correct me, but I'm pretty certain about that.
Okay. I know in the past we'd had some discussions about the, well, are we going to talk about internal service funds later? All right, I'll hold that one. What are our plans from a sales tax standpoint? And we're projected at 4%. If we come in lighter than that, I know we can see the numbers in there in terms of what that delta dollar is. What are the kind of stopgaps?
Sure. So the relief valves, if first off would be any fund balance. We have 270 there built in if it were to go as presented. So that'd be, the easiest first thing. Secondly, as we got into the year, you trust that there's other positives that would come out of revenues and expenditures. Have to take a look at that. And then some of the larger ticket items, we'd have to look at, if things really, deviated dramatically. Our streets and sidewalks is something that we can manage during the year and pull back or speed up, depending upon resources.
If we go back to slide 37, kind of walks us through the debt service. And I know you touched on it. Can you expound a little bit in terms of that ending fund balance and how we've obligated that to the tax assessor?
Yeah. Well, it's going towards debt, but we through that process. I don't know if like John or Cynthia to try to explain that.
Thank you, Councilman. In the debt service fund, in this particular fund, the over policy dollars are utilized to.
Could you move a little closer to the mic?
Decrease the debt service.
Why don't you pick it back up, hold it?
Pick it up, okay, I'm sorry.
This room soaks up all of the sound.
So the state law mandates that when the tax assessor is calculating our effective tax rate, that she excludes the frozen portion of the tax value. In Pearland's case, the frozen portion amounts to $1 billion. So in our opinion, the frozen part artificially increases our debt service portion of our tax rate. So we commit those dollars that they are available in the event that the tax values don't come in. We can use this money to supplement the taxes that do come in to pay our debts. So we commit those dollars to her in order to get her to decrease the tax rate. In this instance, we decreased our tax rate by about 3 cents. So we do commit those dollars, and if the money does come in March, which is what we've done every year, we'll look at it during projections, and if the money's available, we can either defease some debt or put it in the next year's budget, as we did last year, and we planned for defeases as well as paying off the capital leases.
So our proposed budgeted property tax operating revenue of that 34.8 million
Does not include any money from the frozen values. And that is the way that the law requires that she calculates the effective tax rate. We did speak with her in detail about that and kind of tried to argue that a little bit, but that is the way the law mandates that she does the calculation.
Okay. She does the calculations, but we set the tax rate, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We can maybe I can chat with you at break.
I'd be happy
Get
to.
some more info. If we can go to slide 26. The ground maintenance contract. I guess when I look at that as compared to the highlights and kind of the write-up on that additional position, it says we'll be able to increase our current service level. I guess can you expound on that and kind of what is our service level at now?
I think Trent can probably answer that best.
Sure. This is actually taking the last piece of part of our grounds maintenance that we still do in-house and contracting that out as we've done the rest of it, and then reallocating that crew so that they are able to respond to any mowing or cleanup or any other right-of-way issues that we have, which currently we've either got to pull people off of other crews or we have superintendents out doing that work. And if we've got additional details on the volume of that work, if we could have someone from Public Works address that. Just hold it.
Good morning, Andrea Brinkley, Assistant Director of Public Works. The ground maintenance contract will allow us to take the current staff that is assigned to that work. Basically, we're going to contract the work out that's being done at our water and wastewater plant facilities that allows that job load to be addressed by the contract, and those folks are going to get put on a hotshot crew. That basically addresses site triangle issues, trash, any other work that may be necessary in neighborhoods, tree trimming. That allows that supervisor to take that human capital, that intelligence, and address that, how the community looks, any of those things citywide.
And how are we doing that right now?
Right now, that staff is actually mowing at all of our water and wastewater facilities.
Okay, so for any issues that come up, I mean, I guess are we having issues because our current contractors aren't performing correctly, and this is to free up a crew so we can hot shot to clean those issues up?
It's not a matter of contract performance. It's really, there isn't a way to address it right now. We're pulling from, as Trent mentioned, other crews. So it's more of a responsive action. In this case, we would actually have a dedicated crew in a proactive way.
Okay. And are we not getting to the water and wastewater treatment plants timely now?
They are addressing it. However, I would say the standard that we would like to have, it's very difficult for that staff to keep up, in all honesty.
Okay. All right, thank you.
How many people are you talking about?
Hotshot crew, 3, with the help of a superintendent, or supervisor, excuse me.
And Mayor, I think that's what I've got for right now.
Okay. And let's remind everybody that this is strictly for information that we need to clarify before we go into the next session, which is book number 2. Eric? Okay, good. Any clarifying, Councilman Hardon?
I'm good right now, Mayor.
If we make major changes, then we need to vote on it at this point, so. No change? Okay.
good right now.
Perez, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. So, just for clarification on the street and sidewalk. So right now, we're proposing 1.1 million on the street maintenance and about 600,000 for the sidewalk. But my understanding is that the study that was performed within the last 2-3 years when that was done
2014.
rated us with fairly good infrastructure, but in order to maintain that rating, we needed a $3 million investment. To improve on that rating, we needed a $5 million investment. So right now, even if we're going to the proposed budget, we're having some deficiencies in that area, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The number was closer to 3.8 in 2014 dollars for streets only.
To maintain the rating, but not to
maintain-
improve it.
To maintain the rating, yes, sir.
Okay. So right now, I mean, with the 1.1, we're either having to bond to do street improvements of any significance, and we're having to constantly overlay on some of the older roads just to be able to Band-Aid through.
It really limits us to basically an asphalt program at this point, that we do a large portion of it with the county. It's very cost effective to work with the county on the asphalt program, and then the county's limited to about 5 miles that they can do for us annually. So it also allows us to bid out usually one sizable project in addition to what the county does on the asphalt side of things. At this point, it doesn't provide enough funding to really have a comprehensive concrete street maintenance or rehab program. So really, that's more of a responsive thing or a reactive thing to any significant issues, as opposed to proactive maintenance and preventative maintenance on our concrete streets.
So, and we don't even have the asphalting equipment. We're having to borrow that from the county, correct? We're using their equipment and in order to be able to do the overlays when we can do it in-house?
The county actually comes in and provides the labor, the manpower, as well as the equipment. We buy the materials, and that's a program they operate with all the cities within the county. We do have some in-house capabilities on a small scale, but not not what the county can do.
On the sidewalk budget for the 600,000, is that inclusive of what we're doing in-house, even with the purchase of the new mixer that we're hoping to get this year? Is that budget inclusive of all of that, or is this, the mixer and that crew part of the Public Works budget, and this 600,000 is for us to just contract?
So the 600,000 is for our contract, for the most part, and that is basically our trip hazard and our comprehensive sidewalk repair and replacement program. The mixer and the crews associated with that's more associated with our utility cuts and restoration of streets as well as sidewalks with the utility cuts. Because right now we operate that crew with a 1-yard trailer-mounted mixer, and so if we've got anything of any significance there, they're running back and
Yeah.
forth, and so this will just create a much more efficient crew that can address those utility cuts and restore those much more quickly. We've got a backlog of those restorations right now.
So I've got some thoughts on this. Are we is there another part of the presentation where we're concentrating more on on this maintenance program, or we're just highlighting that for now?
That'd be in the general fund that we're talking about now, so.
So, my concern is we're at this point, I think y'all as staff, well, first off, before I get too far into that, I want to thank all of y'all for what you've done. I know how difficult this is. I mean, even running a small business where I don't even have but a handful of employees, it's tough to keep up with the budget. So all the work that y'all do, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. My appreciation will be shown in my support of the 2% COLA and getting us to the 95% compensation to make sure that y'all we're providing the salary that shows how much we value you. So I think that's a necessary component to the budget. With respect to the street and drain, I just don't think that I think we've begged, borrowed, and stealed as much as we can, but this fund has been taken from a lot over the last several years to make up balances in other budgets, and we're having our roads continue to deteriorate. We had somebody come not too long ago, an older community member who's been very patient, but has been talking for years about Cherry Street and all of those, the Woody, Cherry, that older subdivision, and how the roads are just crumbling. And the only thing we can do is asphalt overlay. And we already know that doesn't work because of the challenges we've had with Orange, which is why we're doing Orange and Linwood. Barring a discussion I've had with some of y'all privately, I'd really like us to advance the conversation of looking at what it's going to take to get to an enterprise fund for road and drainage. I just don't think that there's any other way for us to get to this, make up these fund differences, unless we find another revenue stream. Potentiality is that we could probably take some of the burden of doing street and drainage off of the sales tax and the property tax and put it into an enterprise fund similar to we do water and sewer. And I think based on the values of the study at $5 million a year, and we have a 44 some odd $1 million water and sewer fund, we would be talking about at least initially, a relatively low end. But, something that we can develop. I mean, it'll need to be taxpayer approved, but something we can develop, possibly bond against, and really get to the point where we're aggressively attacking these deteriorating streets and these drainage systems that just aren't functioning. So we can get rid of the wagon trail drainage problems. We can get rid of the Sawyer's Pond drainage problems without having to do it in this, to be honest with you, this very frustrating fashion. So I just don't see that there's going to be another way. On the SCADA system, Andrew, if I could borrow you for a second, are we moving towards a centralized SCADA system where we can have remote control to for all of our treatment facilities, like maybe at the new Orange Street Center? Is that kind of, I mean, over the last few years, I've seen a lot of investment into the SCADA system, and I'm just trying to get to where our end goal is for this.
In the past, we've upgraded our software, and actually that's a major emphasis we're trying to do within the existing operational budget. So one of the most critical things that we identified this year was to improve our communications network. Basically, that means going from just radio to fiber and or cellular with failover back to radio. And that's one of the things that's been, we've been very encouraged. In the past, it's been hard to identify a solution that would really work. So we go out there, run up the pole, re-establish that line of sight. And basically, that's not really the way we want to go into the future. We've identified, with the help of IT, a much more robust industrial grade communication device. Basically, that'll be able to be expandable for our AMI project that we have going on. So anything that we're spending towards SCADA communication can be scalable to that solution as well. So coupled with the software upgrade, moving all of our historian over to the data center and establishing that better communication network, we're getting rid of bottlenecks. That will allow us to see everything from that either mobile or centralized place.
So eventually, we may be able to get to the point where we can reduce staff on that because we can have one person in a centralized location that can be monitoring several plants as opposed to individuals at each plant. Is that what we're trying to move towards?
Well, we don't really have a staff person that is there dedicated to that. So
Well, that's concerning.
we have call-outs, right? So we
Yeah.
don't have one person that's just constantly looking at it 24/7. However, the call-outs work. That's part of our system.
Yeah.
In the future, we plan to have a 24/7 location, being the surface water plant, which would have that capability, and also the Public Works Service Center.
Okay. While you're up there, on the hot shot crew, just for my edification. So right now, we have a crew of roughly 3 with a supervisor that's doing all the maintenance for all of our facilities. We've never contracted that out like we've contracted the right-of-way maintenance. But when we have these issues, like you said, site triangles at roadways where we find out that there's a tree or a bush or some obstruction, some landscape obstruction that's keeping people from being able to see safely, we send those guys out. They have to pull off of what they were scheduling. So this would allow us to just say either amend the existing contract or go out for a new contract. They'll maintain those facilities. And then we believe that there's so much of this hot shot work that would keep that crew busy on a 40-hour week schedule.
There's, right now in 6 months, about 120 to 150 work orders. We think that that is really expandable to about 300 every year. And those work orders those work orders need to be addressed. And if we address it in a more proactive way, we're going to increase the ability to make the city look better. Is there anything?
Good morning, Mayor and Council. To elaborate earlier and to answer Mr. Carbone's question, our current staffing is only allowing us to produce 62% of what the expectation is in the water and sewer maintenance program. 62% is what we can comfortably do with staffing, equipment, and weather-related issues within our area. So transitioning that over to contracts is going to allow us the visits that are assigned to each of those properties. We're going to make sure we can maintain that program appropriately. And then this will allow us to reallocate the existing staff to do the potentially 300 work orders annually. Again, we started the program in 2014. The right-of-way is a new division. So we had to start gauging and tracking the work and the performance we've done since 14. There wasn't a lot of historical data to go back and pull from. But I think staff's done a good job to document that and show the need for the transition of the staff now.
So when you say proactive, not being proactive with respect to staffing that's on site and ready to deal with it as the work orders come in and deal with them in a reactive fashion. You mean proactive in like going out and patrolling the areas, not waiting for somebody to complain, look at site triangles, look at issues where the maintenance needs to be done and perform that on an as-needed basis while also dealing with the complaint-driven work orders, correct?
That's correct. The 150 work orders we received in the first 6 months, that's reactive work. We'd like to be able to manage those without the use of a superintendent and one contract inspector, with there being no staff allocated to actually do the work. So we'd like to be able to do that, then implement the proactive program where we actually go out, identify the needs before our residents do, and address them right then and there.
Okay. And we're thinking overall, because of the staff allocation, even with the contractor, we're going to see a savings.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Maybe this is too much in the weeds, but would we be looking at expanding the existing contract or doing that as a separate contract?
We've got, as you know, over the years, we've had multiple contracts as we've transitioned different pieces of our mowing program to contract. So we've got a contract that'll be coming before you here in the next couple of meetings that consolidates all those for the first time,
Okay.
except for the one we just recently did for open ditch and bridge mowing. So that contract, we could potentially amend and add that to that contract.
And then eventually we'll roll in the open ditch and bridge mowing, and we'll just have one contract and one contract holder for everything.
Yes, sir.
Okay. On the HVAC system, I know we talked briefly about creating a standardized spec because we're having so many issues with the HVAC systems that are custom, and we didn't realize they were custom when the MEPs designed them. How far along are we on that process? Are we going to be able to have some sort of standardization before we put the investment in the HVAC system here? Or are we going to have to, or are we not far enough along on that?
We've started, but to be honest, if we were to look at the lead time for the HVAC system here, we're looking at 8 to 10 weeks. So we can probably pull a good amount of it together, but to implement that citywide, based on this facility, I think it'd be a little bit difficult. We have a lot of work to do with our engineering folks, other city staff. Could we do that for just HVAC and implement it all the way through our design criteria? We could get a good rough draft, but it's going to be tough to get that added to existing contracts.
In a general sense, when we're designing new facilities, we are standardizing on a smaller list of equipment that's
Okay.
more standard off-the-shelf equipment as opposed to anything customized. It's just, we don't have the full, we haven't developed a full set of, standards, guidelines, and those things, but that's been the instructions and the directions. It's also with what we're dealing with currently here at the Public Safety Building with the temporary units out back. We basically had two options: repair the customized, specialized equipment that we have, or replace those with a more standard package. And the recommendation that'll be before you in the next couple of weeks will be to replace it with a more standardized piece of equipment.
Again, I mean, you kind of stole my term. At least we can get to a point where we know we're purchasing off the shelf that's readily accessible and easily maintained, and we don't have
Has
to do
parts
special
available.
contract, and has parts available. I'm comfortable with moving forward with the purchase of that, and then maybe that can give us some guidelines on the standardization of spec, so that we don't have the natatorium issue in the future.
Member Perez, if I could, this screenshot's up, and we got some information yesterday. We are working through getting the unit that failed here spec'd out. We got some information yesterday about the scope of the future unit, and this is the number that might be a little bit thin. Is that?
Yes, sir. So we've actually got two chillers here, and when this supplemental was first put together, it only incorporated the replacement of one of those. So we're looking at existing funds that we have this current fiscal year that would allow us to couple it with these proposed funds for next year to go ahead and replace both of those units at the same time.
Okay. That's all I have for now. Thank you very much.
Complete your report. Member Owens, some clarification
Sorry,
or
Woody.
suggestions for the next meeting?
Well, yeah, I don't have that many, actually, going through and look at the budget. I think, this year's probably one of the better budgets I've seen. That's probably, people that's here, when I was previously on the council, you probably never heard of that. But anyway, I just want to remind, that the budget is a fluid document. It may go up or down based upon revenue and based upon other things that occur in there. But then the other thing is that, with reoccurring costs, which a lot of this is, it's setting the floor for the next year's budget. I mean, on there. So I think, you know, the last thing, which I always ask, is that the directors in the different departments, they buy into this budget, it's your budget, and you handle it the way it should be handled. But unless you buy into this budget, I think there's a lot of difficulty there, and I've said that in previous council meetings before. And so I just want to make sure that when we go through this budget, that each one of the directors within your department, that you're in agreement with it. It's going to be your budget with, along with, you know, city manager and deputy and assistant city manager, but yet and still, it's yours. And I personally expect you to handle your budget the way you should, and you won't be able to do that unless you buy into the budget and let us know as council members that you do buy into the budget as it is presented today, or whatever it comes out to be. So that's it. That's all.
Wonderful input. Let's move to item number 3. I'd like to ask Clay, would you give us the definition of what is maximum property tax rate publication? What
Yes,
is
sir.
this, so we can talk about the policy directions on that?
Yep. So as part of the rate-setting requirements in Texas, the council is obligated to publish the maximum tax rates that would be considered when you actually adopt that. And the schedule timeline is such that you'll need to do that at the next meeting on the 21st. So again, the rollback rate is about a half cent higher than what's recommended. The effective no new revenue one is below that. We don't have a full council here. I'd suggest, or my intention would be to set that up for the 21st for your consideration at the recommended rate. But if there was a strong consensus majority that wanted us to set that up for your consideration on the 21st differently, this could be a time to do that. And it'd probably be helpful, frankly, to get any feedback on that now. So, and if there's any questions that go along with that. In the transmittal, we showed different scenarios and the impact of that financially and what could and couldn't be done under each of those. So wanted to flag that, and so you weren't in any way, shape, or form surprised on the 21st when that's on the agenda.
Okay, I appreciate that. That information in the record. Councilmember Owens, would you share any policy directions from your perspective?
No,
Okay. Councilmember Perez?
I think, from a conservative perspective, a fiscal conservative perspective, we're getting close to a balanced budget. We're not funding everything that we want to fund, but at least we're targeting a balanced budget, which has not necessarily been the case in the past. And we're only holding the minimal amount of money that we need. So I am 100% comfortable with us going with the proposed rate. It's under rollback. It's a moderate increase, but I think we do this for a few more years, and then we'll get to the point where we don't necessarily have to increase in subsequent years. So I'm 100% on board with the proposed rate, and I really appreciate staff's diligence in putting that together.
I just want to make sure the headlines all this come right. It's a moderate, small decrease from the current. It's
The current rate,
Yes, sir.
increase in revenue,
Yeah, from the current, yes.
yes.
You want me to chime in on that?
You'll get your turn, sir. You'll get your turn.
Yeah, good. That's so good. Or no?
It's the same place we end up this time of year, pretty much every year. What I'm hearing so far is go with the proposed rate. Honestly, the proposed rate doesn't get us what we said we wanted in a couple of meetings ago when we looked at salaries. In order to do that, we've got to go above the rollback rate. So to me, it's a confusing message, not only to staff, but to our tax base. I think that's the direction we need to give. Are we happy with the 95%? If so, then we're probably at the right place. I'll be honest, the sales tax does bother me a little bit. I've sat up here in years when we've looked at that number, and thankfully it came in where it needed to at the end of the year, but about midway through, we're going, okay, these numbers aren't looking real good, and that's not a fun place to be. Then we look at what's happening in Austin. I'll be honest, I see no solace, or I don't see anything warm and fuzzy coming out of Austin. So, you know, I'm at the position where I think we need to look at what others in the area are doing. And I think if you look at that, it's pretty clear when you look at tax rates that have not gone down, even though the same exact values have gone up. We're one of the few entities that has taken that risk and said, okay, we're going to cut back because we can. That's a good thing until we can't. And I mean, you can just look at the other taxing entities around, and they've said we're keeping our tax rate where it is. We're going to bank that money because we have no idea what Austin's going to do. And maybe y'all have a better feel up here for what Austin's going to do than I do, but you know, I don't think I'll have the support to go to the rollback rate or even go above the rollback rate, but I do believe that's the best thing. When you look at the long term and you look at the position we're in, yeah, our debt service is a little less than it's been before, but it's still not where I think anybody up here is comfortable with it being. And I don't think the average taxpayer has any clue when we look at that dollar bill and where their funds go. I think most of them feel like the majority of the money goes to running the city, and the honest answer since I've been here is no, the large majority of it goes to pay off interest and goes to pay off debt. So, you know, I don't think I surprised anybody with these comments. They're pretty much the same thing I've been saying since I've got up here, but it scares me every year we go down this road, and then every 2 years Austin gets thrown in the mix, and that's getting scarier and scarier.
You know, I think that we have accomplished an awful lot to build a beautiful city that we have, and with the facilities that we have in place. And if we're going to continue supporting 5,000 to 8,000 new people coming in every year, I think we need to share something called public relations. We need to put something a little bit more out to the citizens, sharing with them what we've accomplished with the tax rate we've accomplished. And what we have done is in building the community that we have, and as we are going to continue to grow, how we have been able to use the tax dollars most effectively to draw in quality development in all places. And we have a lot of beautiful homes, a lot of good schools, a lot of good roads. But in order to continue this and maintain it and reach the goal of completing our city, we probably need to share with them a little bit of what we've accomplished to date and how we've been able to make the big dollars that we get stretch pretty. We've made them pretty elastic, and they've stretched pretty well. And that I think if we could handle at least the same tax rate we had last year, I think we can be able to continue preparing our city for future growth that we're going to have. I like what you're doing.
I know this is Councilmember Ordino's last budget, and so and definitely miss the comments and the back and forth between he and Councilmember Carbone. At any rate, I'm comfortable with with the budget, and thank you, staff, for taking the time to put together a budget that falls under the rollback. I know there will be some people that are excited about that. Kind of off of what Councilmember Ordino mentioned, I don't like just having just enough money in the bank and just enough money to pay bills. Councilman Perez mentioned streets and sidewalks, and we've taken from that since I've been on council and beforehand. And so it doesn't really seem like we're really trying to address it. We are addressing certain areas in the capital improvement projects. We have Orange Street and a couple other expansions that will take care of some of the streets and sidewalks, but our current streets and sidewalks outweigh, the not necessarily the need, but just outweigh the CIPs that we're currently putting money towards. And, we only have, 1.1 million, is it, towards streets and sidewalks? That kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I thought just streets is 1.1 and then 6 for sidewalks.
6 for sidewalks, okay. We've all heard complaints of folks that have put in requests for their sidewalks to be redone, and it's, 2-3 years behind. And so we kind of tape it up or put a Band-Aid over it. And that's understandable. To the point, basically, I'm happy that we are where we are from a tax rate for this year. But I do think that, that there's room for not improvement, but for maybe sticking to, well, not sticking to where we are, because I think that only goes to, from what I understand, the pay plan. It would only increase the pay plan. It wouldn't increase anything else. And so, that would involve us going over rollback to increase the pay plan and maybe put things towards other budgetary items. Again, I'm comfortable with where we're at. I wouldn't be necessarily opposed if I saw something that went above rollback. I know what's coming after me is probably going to be the complete opposite. But again, I'm comfortable with where we're at for right now. Although I'm gonna miss Keith's comments or Councilman Warno's comments, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to the man himself.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Couple comments or questions, or maybe some additional things to see for the next meeting. I know we've got several examples on some sampled homestead or some homeowner bills, like we did when we talked about changing the water and sewer rates. Could we, and I know this is a much more difficult process, could we pull a few commercial tax bills? Because those are the ones that don't have any homestead cap. They're liable to be more drastically affected than homeowners, rightfully, wrongfully so, at least so we can see what that impact is. Also, the big driver is the comp and class and the pay plan. I'd like to see some more or better understand how we're getting to that 100%. The way I read it, we're getting to the 100% in the next 2 years. I guess the first question that comes to my mind is, so that study's going to be almost 3 years old, and we're saying, hey, we appreciate you, but we're going to get you to 100% where you should have been 3 years ago. Are we projecting out to adjust that based off of continuing COLA adjustments? Just more, I guess, for my benefit and also for staff, how are we getting there? In terms of this agenda item and the maximum tax rate, I guess probably the biggest question I have in my mind is what we discussed briefly earlier is I've got to get comfortable on that debt service rate. And, back to how this discussion led off, we're cutting the tax rate, yes. This is still a tax increase. You look at a few of the example bills, they're anywhere from 7.5% to 10% increase in property taxes. That's hitting folks in the pocketbook. That's on top of the 10% that we've seen and are going to continue to see for the foreseeable future, and we'll see later today in the water and sewer rates. So, am I comfortable where we're at in the proposed budget. I think that's where we're gonna end up, so I'm not gonna spend too much time beating the same drum. But this isn't a celebration. We're cutting the tax rate. We're trying to squeeze every penny we can, and I think staff's done a good job, and I look forward to this process every year. But at the end of the day, I'm not sitting up here proud that we're cutting the tax rate. We're increasing taxes. Everybody's tax bill's going up. You know, thinking back to this time last year, the valuations increased more last year. So as Mr. McCarter said, there's a lot of homeowners that are going to peg out that 10% cap again this year. It's not a time to celebrate because we're cutting the rate, but I think we are doing the best we can with where we're at. So, barring some discussion around the debt service rate, I think I'm good with the proposed rate for the 21st discussion. I guess one thing, if I could follow up, since we were talking on sidewalks earlier, I know I've mentioned this in passing. Is there any way, and I don't know if it's legal, procedural, that we could set up some sort of matching funds or something to make our dollars we're spending for sidewalks stretch even further? If we've got a HOA or somebody that says, hey, we want to do our sidewalks, we're willing to put up half or some percentage, kind of like we do with TxDOT to make our dollars stretch further. If we've got entities or individuals in the community that are willing to do that, and would it make sense to look at that? And if not, if legally we can't do it, that's fine, but at least I'd like to have that discussion.
We just did that on Kirby or Kingsley, where we had the school district and the county contribute to a sidewalk. Alvin ISD.
I'm not familiar with that one. I think legally, I'll defer to Darren on that, but that it's something we could do, you know, and if it's something we want to put a structure together for how that would work, we could look at that as well.
I would agree. It could legally be done. I think the issue is ultimately whether or not we budget the funds to be able to match, and and then also have an agreement with whichever HOA or entity that we're out there working with.
Okay. I mean, right now we've got $600K set aside. I'm fine leaving that there. And if after the budget's passed, if we find out that we can pull out $100K of that and end up, getting $1 million worth of work for that $100K, I guess if we need to do a budget amendment once we put that in place, the bottom line wouldn't change, but we might be able to get more feet of sidewalk for what we're spending.
Since we had 3 council members mention this, do we want to give staff direction to propose a rate that includes the 100% of the comp study at the next budget meeting?
No.
Okay. So we're fine with the 95?
I mean, that'd be going above rollback, and I've heard 2 people.
I'm not saying, I don't know what it would be, so do we want to at least look at it?
We could go to 100% on, a half a week before the next budget cycle. I mean, right now we're pushing it out mid-year, right? We could push it out to 11/12 of the year, or whatever, 95% of the year. We could get there. But that just forces our hand next year.
I just want to give staff direction of whether we want them to look at that or not.
Yeah.
Again, I'm comfortable with the 95, but I'd be perfectly happy to give them the 100% if there's a palatable way to do this. As I went through the book, I don't remember seeing a budget number that specifically addressed that. So if we could, at very least, we could have them look at it and give us what that number is.
Well, I think direction-wise, I've heard clarity on the proposed tax rate is what we want to look at. Now, whether we can move some stuff around to get that 95 up or that timing change.
Let's take it as streets.
Well, yeah, we're going to make residents pay if they want us to fix their sidewalks.
Come on, guys. It's kind of interesting. We've got a city where people come here because of the quality of the service and the kind of city that we have. I've often wondered if they're going to leave for the tax rate, where they're going to go that has a lower tax rate than what we have in Pearland. I think Alvin has a larger one. I think some of the other cities do too. But I know that I've talked to several people that were concerned about the tax rates, you know, of the cities. And I said, well, you could go find another city, but they said, yeah, but I want to live in Pearland. Well, you're getting what you want in Pearland for what I think is a very bargain price. And we're trying to maintain what we have been able to develop as a city that people want to come to. And I think we'd be betraying all of the citizens that we have if we start cutting the thing down to the point where we don't finish the sidewalks, we don't finish our streets, we don't hire the new police and first responders that we need. So I think we, from my policy standpoint, I say let's keep what we've got right today, don't make it any lower. Any further comments from council at this point? If not, let's move to item number 4, which is back to a presentation from Clay.
This might be a good place for a break, Mayor, because the next section's all the water and sewers, so might as well take advantage of some of the good Pearland water right now.
The sewer might be more important than the water.
And 17, moving in our agenda to item number 4. Clay?
Thank you, sir. Next section is our enterprise fund, the water and sewer, and Neely Walker will take you through that.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Good morning, Mayor, Council. I'm Neely Walker, Senior Budget Analyst for the city, and I will be presenting the enterprise fund for you today. The budget includes a 10% revenue increase, which generates approximately $4 million in needed additional revenue. This is down from the anticipated 19.1% increase forecasted last year. Water and sewer fund expenditures total $48.82 million, of which $17.36 million is included for debt service and capital leases. The other requirements department, which includes debt service, makes up 48.6%, followed by water production at 19.7% and water reclamation at 10.7%. Water and sewer revenues are $50 million, expenditures $48.8 million, and revenues over expenditures are $679,000. Beginning cash equivalents are $16.67 million, reserved for debt service $5 million, leaving a proposed ending cash equivalents of $12.35 million. We reach bond coverage at 1.82 and cash reserve ratio at 25%. Of the $49.3 million required for the CIP for 2018, $45.77 million will be sold for revenue bonds. The principal balance after the 2018 payments of $17.27 million are made will be $191.85 million, excluding any new debt issued in 2018. In the following slides, I will review the multi-year forecast, the rate model, and rates and fees. The 2019 forecast, a revenue increase of 18.4% required to meet the cash reserve ratio. The city anticipates selling $108.46 million in revenue bonds, of which $106 million is for the surface water plant. Phase 1, a revenue increase of 15.6% is anticipated for fiscal year 2020, leaving an ending cash equivalents of $16.13 million. Bond coverage and cash reserve are met at 1.89 and 25%. Revenue bonds for 2020 are anticipated to be $81.85 million, with the majority of the funds to be allocated to the balance required to complete the water surface plant and 2 water reclamation facility expansions. The city revised its rate structure to a base charge scaled up by meter size. Rate increase follows the rate structure put in place last year. Due to the significant needs of capital in the last few years, revenue increases have been required to ensure financial stability and health of the water and wastewater system, which follows several years of no increase. Rate increases were placed on both water and sewer base and volumetric rates using the city's current rate structure. A 2,000-gallon residential customer with a 5/8 inch or a 3/4 inch meter will see a $3.40 increase, while a 10,000-gallon residential customer with a sewer cap at 8,000 and a 5/8 inch or 3/4 inch meter will incur a $9.38 increase on their water bill. On the commercial side, a small office building customer with a 2-inch meter using 53,000 gallons would see an increase of $64.08 from their current invoice of $646.10, while a large customer's invoice with a 6-inch meter and consumption of 169,000 gallons will increase by $264.06. The current bill for a residential customer using 6,000 gallons of water and sewer is $67.20. The same customer in League City has a $61.27 bill, and in Friendswood, $51.98. 82% of the 37,000 customers are residential, 32% multi-unit, 3% commercial, and 2% irrigation. Of those 37,000 customers, 94% have a 5/8 inch or 3/4 inch meter, and the other 6% have a 1 inch or higher. Residential customers consume 65.9% of the water sold, commercial 20.5%, and irrigation is 13.6%. At this time, I'm going to turn it back over to John McCarter.
Thank you, Neely. In this section, we'll review the city's internal service funds. The city currently has 2 internal service funds. The first is our property and liability insurance fund. This fund basically exists to pay the premiums on our general and liability insurance, including our windstorm. Also covers claims as well. Kind of the highlight for this fiscal year, we are purchasing a vehicle out of this fund for our risk management division to use. Currently, staff is using their own vehicles at expense to the city for mileage and gas. We are planning a drawdown in fund balance to bring that fund balance around $150,000. Our policy minimum requires us to keep an average of 3 years claims on hand, which equates to about $85,000. So we're still substantially above that minimum amount. But we were able to see a savings to the general fund, especially in water and sewer, by taking advantage of that. Next is the medical self-insurance fund. We kind of did a deep dive at this around projections when we had IPS on site. What we have in the budget is essentially what you saw during that meeting. But the highlights of that, the individual stop loss at $125,000, aggregate stop loss of $7.75 million. The ending fund balance does exceed our targeted minimum, which is 30% of our total expense, total plan cost to the city. Even with the $200,000 use of fund balance to defray some of that cost to both the city and our employees, and the drawdown at mid-year that we had planned. Other funds, so the city has a number of other special revenue funds. They vary in size. There are quite a few, so I'll go through kind of quick to hit kind of the highlights. Our court building fund, we do have a planned use of fund balance of about $7,000, bringing our ending fund balance to just over $20,000. Our citywide donation, we are planning to use about $96,000 of that for various expenses, which are outlined in Book 2. About $64,000 drawdown in that fund balance to roughly $13,000, almost $14,000. Core technology, again, we see a drawdown of about $1,700, bringing us down to $3,400 for our ending policy amount. Police seizure is a little bit unique in that we only budget interest here, so you don't see a full revenue from what we'll actually see. That's kind of based on what we end up actually seizing. But the ending fund balance there being $182,000, almost $183,000. Federal police, same deal, where we see that fund balance of about $17 there. Our juvenile case management fund, we see a drawdown of about $6,700, bringing us to $11,000, just under $12,000 ending fund balance there. Looking at our infrastructure funds versus our solid waste fund, we are adding about $5,000 to the bottom line there for the ending fund balance of $444,000. The sidewalk fund, we're not planning any expenditures for this current year. We kind of have an estimate, depending on really development drives most of that. But we are projecting a fund balance of roughly $11,000 for the end of next fiscal year. Traffic improvement, again, we have $1,000 in revenue there without any planned expenses, bringing that ending fund balance to $553,000. Looking at kind of by our strategic priority, our parks, recreation, and events, we see our hotel motel, which is our convention and visitor bureau. We are planning about almost $7,800 in contribution to that fund balance. One of the highlights of this fund is we are planning to use some CVB money to pay for the stage at Independence Park. I believe that number is $390,000. But we can do that within the planned revenues, bringing our total fund balance projected to about $4.5 million. Park donation, we see a use of expenses here to cover some planned expenditures in the next fiscal year. Planning to use about $8,800 in fund balance to bring that ending fund balance down to about $132,000. Park development, again, a lot of this is driven by development within the city, but we do plan to add about $124,000 to that bottom line to bring the balance up to $993,000. Tree trust fund, we have $12,000 in expenses there, planning to draw down just under that for our from our fund balance to bring that total to $62,000. Our PEG fund, municipal channel, we have roughly about $170,000 that we're planning to add to that fund balance there, bringing that total to about $786,000. Our grant funds, Mr. Joel Hardy did a deep dive a few council meetings ago about what we're planning to spend that money on. Shows a net zero to the fund balance. In the grant fund, we'll maintain our fund balance of $51,000. And then the CDBG, we have planned expenses for all of those revenues coming in. Pearland Economic Development Corporation, Mr. Matt Buchanan leads the way over there. There is a planned use of $3.6 million in revenue. That brings the ending fund balance down to $16.7 million. Some highlights there, we have $2 million planned in business incentives, looking at some of the implementation around the Highway 35 redevelopment strategy plan that's been ongoing the last few years, about $3 million. Also some development in Lower Kirby, both those taken together about $2.3 million there. Fee updates. So we sent out a little bit early a fee packet. We did not, with the exception of water and sewer fees last year, do a fee update. So this is the first one that we've seen formally come through council since FY16. There were quite a few, so the thought was to share that early to give you all an opportunity to dive into those a little bit more. We review these annually. We review the ordinance as a whole as part of the budget process. First recommendations kind of came into the budget office in January, so we got a little bit of an early jump. The fee ordinance, which is redlined in the appendix, is adopted by ordinance, just like the tax rate, just like the budget in September. We'll do that with 2 readings. So I don't want to dive into all those. We could be here all day. So what we did was basically pull out the major items to hit on these. We do want to open up to any questions, of course, after the presentations are finished today. Previously discussed, I know Neely hit on this, was the 10% increase with the water and sewer rate. The details of that are reflected in the appendix in that red line version. Per council direction and discussion that we've had at early budget input sessions, we are planning to pass credit card fees on to customers beginning next year. That, in terms of reflection on the city, is an expense that we just don't budget for next year. It's not any additional revenue. The amount for that will vary depending on Visa, MasterCard, and some other gateway things that are dictated via our contract. Our public work fees, we did update quite a few of those. You'll see those that are updated to reflect the actual cost associated with delivering that service. Our parks and recreation fees, we did update those in line with a study done and some policy discussions, and to encourage rentals. One exciting implementation is the introduction of the 7 for 7 membership, which is basically 7 days for $7, a membership to the rec center to encourage additional memberships. On the development side, we did see an increase on the, we're recommending an increase on the planned unit development. Again, that's adjusted to recover costs associated with delivering that service. And then the garage sale fee is from $25 to $30, I believe. That additional $5 to, again, recover those costs associated with that. The re-inspect fees, I believe fire and utility billing, standardizing that to $75. We've had that at different amounts, and this will kind of flatten it. An initial inspection is planned in the permit fee, so we're not charging for the initial inspection. This would just be if there's a failure and a re-inspection needed. With that, I am going to hand it over to Mr. Upton to take it from here on the 5-year CIP.
Thank you, John. Good morning, Mayor and Council. We're here to continue talking a little bit on the CIP process, or the 5-year plan for how we want to do capital improvement projects throughout the next 5 years. But just a little bit on this is that you are looking to, at the first year, which is the fiscal year 18, as part of this budget. In the remaining 4 years, we look at planning for our future projects, and that's just for forecasting also. Some projects, of course, will be tied between multi-years, but this is a full lookout from that point forward. What is capital improvement? What are they? These are new projects, new construction. This could be a complete tear down of a building with a brand new building replacing it. It could be a brand new road. McCard Road, connected from Cullen over to Makawa, would be considered a new construction project. Could be new sewer lines, new water lines that are in areas what we call greenfields. Those are major and non-routine. With that, we step on to improvements. That's improvements to existing infrastructure that we can recapitalize. That is City Hall, for example. Could be additions to the library. Also, road reconstruction, which you'd see out on Linwood, Orange, Old Alvin. Those are all improvements, and those are expected to have long life. That's what we're planning for, is long life expectancy, to have those live over the cost of the bonds that are issued. So these are new assets, add value. And so what do we define those are? Those are greater than the life of the bonds and greater than $100,000 in value. All costs that we do when we roll this in for capital improvement programs are all costs associated with design through construction. Those include preliminary investigation, land acquisition, the design, construction management, or construction management of that, inspections, then also the construction itself, and then closeout. That's all of it. It does not include, for example, equipment purchased, and I'll use a fire station, for example. We would not include the cost of the fire truck itself to be in there. That's part of operations and maintenance. So what does our 5-year plan look like? What's estimated right now is about $566 million, as City Manager Pearson stated earlier today. How is that comprised? It comprises about 58% in the water and sewer avenue. This is infrastructure associated with growth, with rehabilitation, expansion, needs to meet our public. Streets, 21% of the budget is associated with that over the next 5 years. This is new roads, cost sharing, as we have 80-20 splits with TxDOT, and then from there also road reconstruction. Facilities, as we'll project down the road, Fire Station 1, Fire Station 8, those meeting the City Gate study. Also new facilities for Public Works and Engineering divisions. Taking a look at potential for the library out of Shadow Creek Ranch area. Parks, also taking a look at expansion of new parks and revitalization, and then drainage needs. How are these funded? Of that $566 million, you can take a look, is that 32% are dealing with water and revenue bonds, impact fees on water and sewer side that are associated with the debt service with those. Other funding sources, and I like to capitalize on those other funding sources, is those that we share with HGAC or TxDOT. Those are 80-20 splits. Tip money, and out of the PEG fund too. Those are other sources that would call coming in. COs and GOs, that you're familiar with. We have listed there as new proposed GOs. Those are forecasting based on the 2019 bond referendum that would be proposed. So those projects are listed in the CIP, and we'll talk about those a little later in the presentation here. And then you'll see the rest of those associated with cash on hand or just general revenue. So here's how the 5-year CIP is broken down. You'll see drainage needs, and I'd like to highlight those drainage needs real quick is that we've projected out, and we'll talk about those in the next couple slides, why there is none listed out in 21 and 22. That is because of our master drainage plan, and so we are evaluating that, and then that'll bring forth future CIP needs as we take a look for regionalization of drainage needs. Again, concentrating on the 2018, that is what you're looking to approve in the budget this year. The remainder of the CIP is associated with future planning and focusing and forecasting our future needs, and then of course any changes due to priorities thereafter. So capitalizing on that and breaking these down by individual topics, drainage is our first one that we'll cover, and you can see we have a map up here associated with the areas located in the 5-year CIP on drainage. Here's the projects that are dictated. I'll just capitalize a few of them for for the fiscal year 18. The south quadrant of Old Town Ditch, this is the area associated with Walnut and Old Alvin. We're in design, we're finishing up that design right now, and we'll be going out on the street for bid, and that is to work in those areas associated with the localized flooding and to provide detention. And so this is spread across a couple years for what we have now in 17, then also future for next year in 18. What we also have is the PER, or preliminary engineering reports, for future bond referendum. This is going to come out of our master drainage plan, and we'll be taking those selected projects and then defining them further to get good cost estimates, so that when we go out to the voters, we'll have good cost estimates for that referendum. And so then that'll then therefore set the needs future for the future CIP of drainage. Parks. And you can see that several areas located in the parks deal with trails. Those are agreements that we'll have forthcoming also in partnerships with TxDOT and then localized areas. So what we have is, highlighting a couple of those, is that Independence Park, Phase 1. As you all know, we're in design, and then we've bid that out, and we're finalizing the selection process to come forth with a contractor to be able to do that work. Shadow Creek Ranch Trail and Green Tea Terrace Trail, those are partnerships. Those are 80-20 splits with HGAC and TxDOT, and those are in the design phase, but then we're also going to be coming forth in the coming month to talk about the AFA, the construction process of that, so we can make sure we get that on the street. And again, you'll see in each of these topics is that there is a PER for the future bond referendum. That is the preliminary engineering report of these projects. In this case, we have 4 projects that are highlighted in yellow. Those are for the 2019 proposed bond referendum. This PER that we have set up for that line item is to take a look at those projects and dial down and define good cost estimating and some preliminary layouts, so that when we go to the voters, we can have information readily available for them. Next topic is on facilities. As you can tell, we are moving throughout the entire city with a lot of revitalization in our facilities. Continuing with Orange Street Service Center. Yeah.
Going to mention that. This is a new slide. This wasn't in the initial.
Correct. We're good. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This, apologize. This is a 2 new slides that were missed out in the presentation, so you may not have. That's what everyone's telling me. I'm aware of it. I apologize that you are not. So you get to look up at me and look at the screen up here. So the facility side is that taking a look through there, you've got the Orange Street Service Center, and that is the plan for the new Public Works and Engineering building on Orange Street. That'll be the removal of the fire department and Fire Station 1 after Fire Station 1 is built and relocated. Continuing on with the the studies that are associated with the fire department, and this is looking at Fire Station 8 for design, Fire Station 1 continuation to build out and complete, then also heading towards Fire Station 7 in design towards the latter part of fiscal year 18. In there also talking about the facilities maintenance plan. That facilities maintenance plan is to take a look and evaluate the buildings. As we've talked about a lot earlier, and then what's in the supplemental is about items that are failing, or as Councilman Perez stated, for standardization, is to take a look at that and come up with a facilities maintenance plan, do preventative maintenance, and set forth the criteria necessary. So that's part of, that is what is going to come out of that facilities assessment maintenance plan. Again, we also have a future referendum for a preliminary engineering report for the highlighted projects. That would be the animal shelter and the Shadow Creek Library, if those are selected as part of the bond referendum. Now we can head back to your package on streets. As you can tell, that is highly active throughout the entire city. You can see, continuing with that, the top line item on this slide and also the bottom line item is dealing with Old Alvin Road, Orange Street, Linwood area. Those are continuing to get those completed. The other two major projects that we have on this slide are dealing with Hughes Ranch Road and also Smith Ranch Road. Both of those are TxDOT funded 20 splits. We are trying, in our opinion, trying to move up Hughes Ranch Road to get that done. It is actually projected to be in 2019-2020 with TxDOT. We're looking to move that up to facilitate that area being constructed, but at the same time that the toll roads are being constructed. That way it's all done at once, and then when everything's done, we can turn that over to our citizens to use versus keeping it in construction in perpetuity. Again, on this slide with streets, you also see, again, as a preliminary engineering report to take a look at the three highlighted areas. That's continued street reconstruction, identifying those streets and coming up with good cost estimates for future. And of course, Pearland Parkway. That's been a topic of discussion in terms of making that the super street concept, and along with a new roundabout in the center that would better flow on traffic. Water infrastructure, apologize. There's a map looking at everything associated that we want over the next 5 years on the CIP with water, and we'll talk about that. The 521 water line from up 521 from Broadway to Mooring Point. This is a continuation and to connect to provide better looping on the water system. We're in design, and this was will spread across 2 fiscal years due to just funding allocation as necessary. The McCard Road 16-inch water, or McCard Road water line, that will run across the new road from Cullen over to Makawa. And this will be in place prior to us building McCard, but we're in the process of land acquisition right now. So we'll have water and sewer across that. The surface water treatment plant. This is the big topic. As Mr. Pearson stated earlier, this is our big project for the next several years. And this is funded through a Texas Water Development Board funding obligation. So we'll continue moving forward over the next several years with that. We are currently with 2 of the firms looking at the pre-sedimentation basin design and also the design of the plant itself. We'll also be looking at the water meter changeout program. This was mentioned earlier. Ms. Brinkley mentioned that a little bit on the backbone on communication and SCADA. This is the AMI meter program that will help us develop that. And so part of the Texas Water Development Board funding is also this meter program. Continuing on water is also the underground facilities at the booster stations. This is continued to keep that pipelines in place and in working order so we don't have any failures. A continued program associated with removing transite pipe and converting it over to plastic, to PVC, and keep our water there. And then the final 3 projects that are listed for the year are developer driven. These are with the Massey Oaks development and our agreements with them as well. And so these are for oversizing on 1128 and down County Road 100 and then back up Veterans as that is developed. So this would help us increase our line sizes as future development continues to grow in that area. wastewater. It's the same following along with water, is that we're spread throughout the city on a variety of needs that are necessary as growth continues. The McCard Road trunk sewer, this is a continuation to also match as we develop McCard Road, is to get infrastructure in place as well prior to the road being constructed. Again, we're in the land, getting ready to start the land acquisition phase, and then once that's there, then we'll start hitting the underground utilities. Both the Berry Rose and the JHEC water reclamation facility expansions, those are in design, preliminary engineering reports, 30% designs. We're going to continue that and finalize those designs of those expansions so that we're ready for the needs as necessary as growth continues. We're currently operating around the range of around 50 to 75% of capacity, which is getting us to the cusp where we need to have these plans in place and ready for expansion as growth demands that. In continuation, the next hit is the sanitary sewer rehabilitation. This is a great program to continue infiltration and intrusion to mitigate that, so we can continue to not bring in stormwater to our system and try and mitigate that. That's a continuation. The other one is Reflection Bay, the lift station that we need to have in front of the influent on the current influent lift station. This will help remove floatables. Currently, our staff is out there cleaning that lift station once to twice a month to remove floatables. We'd be looking at adding this upstream of that so that those floatables are removed and taken care of, and then not necessarily get through the plant, but then also plug the lift station. So again, this is a complete breakdown. You saw a bar chart earlier. This is a complete table associated with each fiscal year on how those funds of sources are being utilized from 2018 to 2022, with a total of about $84 million down at the bottom, coming from a variety of the cash sources from COs. Proposed new GOs that you'll see starting in 2019. Those are ones associated with the bond referendum, and then water revenue bonds as well. One of the things that we also do in the CIP is to project what we call the operations and maintenance needs. This is done for each project. Once the project is implemented, what is going to be the needs associated with maintaining that and taking care of that new asset? These are built into the general fund multi-forecast that will be discussed a little later in this presentation. And they're also built into the revenue, water, and sewer future projections as well, dealing with operations and maintenance. Overall, this is a continuation and covered 2 slides. This is overall, you'll see for 2019 progressing forward is associated a little bit of a negative there in 2019, but that is due to the McCard Road water line. We're taking a look at that, and that O&M going down due to the ability to push water from one side of the city to the other, utilizing a cheaper water revenue source, pushing it from the east side at the Alice plant over to 521, where we have a little higher volume, higher cost on water coming from City of Houston on the 521 plant. This will help us to shave off some of those peaks. It doesn't eliminate it, but it helps reduce some cost. You'll see here that over the $84 million, almost $85 million that's proposed for fiscal year 18, 58% of that is in the water and wastewater fund, 22% in the street side, and then the remaining approximate 20% over the rest of the programs from facilities to drainage. Given revenues associated with that, where the funding sources are for each of those. You will see a little bit of a delta between that is covered due to some cash on hand that is left over from other projects, so we are vitalizing that, reusing that, I should say. Then again, the other funding sources as defined earlier, as I mentioned, are from TIP or PEG funding, fund balance, other projects as well. As I mentioned several times as we went through each of those slides talking about preliminary engineering reports, each of those dealing with the future bond referendum, talking in 2019 and taking a look at projects. Staff took the time and took a look at all those project needs, and we'll define those in a minute, but just to recap a few things. 2007 was the last bond referendum. We're projecting that to be completed in 2022. I know that's kind of a little bit I want to talk about on explanation of why that is taking so long. As I can see from the dais up there, is that all projects have actually been either completed or are in process, meaning design or construction, minus the D.L. Smith drainage project that was identified, holding off on that while we're doing the master drainage plan, so we make sure we meet the needs correctly on drainage. So they're in some form or fashion either completed or nearing design or completion. The reason why a lot of these are pushed out to 2022 is that during the, I'll say the recession a little bit of 08, 09 timeframe, the funds weren't there as necessary as dictated for the assessed value, so therefore we were able to take some time and procure some additional funding. That's the shared funding from TxDOT. A lot of our road projects were going to be done solely by the city funds. We were able to get 80/20, and so therefore that has pushed some of those out due to the funding obligations associated with TxDOT. So that's why it's out on some of those streets to 2022. One of those examples would be the Makawa Road widening. That is a shared project. It's projected in 2021, 2022. So on the future bond referendum, what we did is that we took a look at all the projects that we have. We have about 24 projects that we were looking at. We've prioritized them. The total of all those projects equated to about $124 million. It does not include master plans. When I talk about that, meaning that like Parks Master Plan, what are the results from that? What are the results from Drainage Master Plans? It does not take a look at those because some of those are still being developed. Also, same with our multimodal. So this is taking a look at projects that we know about, things that we need to get done and want to get done. We also took some, our advice from you, Council, in regards to that, is to make it maybe a little shorter, less costly in terms of making it more manageable, so that we can really do this in a 5-year plan. And so we came up with a value associated with that, with a value of about $70 million for 2019. This is built into our long-range forecast. Again, this is to be able to manage that so we can get these projects completed within that time frame. And this will be presented to the voters, if so desired, when the valuation of the properties get to $9 billion, which we're projecting right now to, as programmed, fiscal year 19. So taking a look at this, this is the list of 24 projects that the staff came up with. We've ranked the top 10. That equates to the $70 million in projects. Those were all highlighted during the presentation. Again, there is no drainage projects in here, as we were waiting for that master drainage plan to be finalized. So hopefully later this calendar year, first of the next calendar year, so I'll say first part of 18, and while we're programming for the next budget and next capital program for fiscal year 19, we'll have those projects identified. This is the plan, or the proposed right now. Again, this is just a snapshot of projects throughout the list of everything to be able to maximize the $70 million and to also make it a reasonable and successful bond program as well. I'd like to turn this over to John to head on the multi-year forecast.
All right, so our last section we'll hit on today is our multi-year forecast. We include this as part of our annual budget, so we can see kind of where we're going in the future. Probably the best place to start is with our assumptions. In other words, what do we have built into this multi-year plan? On the revenue side, we follow, when we talked about the debt service rate earlier in Mr. Pearson's introduction and outlined in his transmittal, we are basing our assumptions on 8% growth on property, assessed value in FY19 and 6% in FY20. We're also including a 4% sales tax over the duration of the forecast period, and kind of our baseline is 3% annual growth on most of the other things. That does vary depending on kind of what the revenue is. On the expense side, we do have 2% cost of living increase built in each of those years. We also include all the O&M items that Mr. Upton had in his presentation. You can see a handout of those in the multi-year section within the budget book that outlines those specifically. We also have $150,000 per year for comp and class. That number is likely going to change It's included in there more of a placeholder than it is a hard number. We just know with the 2% and comp and class, we're working our way closer towards that 100% market goal. We also have 400,000 included for continuous onboarding. This is 3 quarters starting in January, just like this year. So what does that mean for our bottom line? Essentially, what we're looking at in FY19, kind of adding slightly to the fund balance, with revenues going up about $5 million, somewhere in there. Expenses tracking very similarly. We do, along with the fund balance policy moving up, similar into FY20, adding again to that fund balance. The big difference is our policy minimum moving up, so we're staying north of that policy minimum over the course of those years. So what does all that mean in terms of a tax rate? We talked about the debt service rate earlier in the presentation. The O&M rate is really what is driven by those assumptions. So this is based on those assumptions, and we add the huge asterisk every year that we do this, that these change depending on a number of factors. This is our best guess based on what we have in reoccurring costs and what we've outlined in terms of CIP. So we do see an increase in the O&M side each of the next 2 years if those assumptions are met. The asterisk that is likely to change. So on that note, we want to open it back up to discussion with council. We're here to answer questions. Again, a reminder, any formal changes you'd like to make would need to be voted upon.
Okay. That completes your report on all that?
Yes, sir.
Good. Well, let's give council a little opportunity here to indicate some areas that need clarifying, need to be included in the budget. And I'm going to start off with Councilmember Carbone.
All right, thank you, Mayor. First off, on the internal service funds, we've got 2 of them. I believe we discussed in the past adding a fleet, internal service fund for fleet and fleet replacement. I guess I was expecting to see that in this coming budget.
So, I don't remember the date on that number. We can re-share it out. I believe we shared kind of what the seed money on that would cost, and frankly, the resources just were not there this year. We do have, if you remember last year at FY17, we earmarked, I believe it was $275,000 for that specific purpose. That's sitting in other requirements right now. It hasn't been spent. What we'll do when we do carryovers is basically do a transfer to create that fund at carryovers. But we didn't have money to do it in this year, and since it's sitting in FY17, we really couldn't add that into the budget specifically. But still something in the long term that we're moving to.
So is that in the multi-year forecast?
It's not as of right now.
Okay. I'd like to discuss that. I mean, if it's not in this budget, it may be after we get through budget season, if we can kind of do I wouldn't say a workshop, but maybe an agenda item for input and discussion. Next up, slide 88, I believe. Actually, 74 and 88. 74 is the credit card expenses, and 88 outlines the meter replacement. I don't know about other council members, but there were so many issues converting over to this new system in terms of utility billing. Personally, I'd always been on bank draft. My bank draft didn't get set up, and so I had to go in and get everything set up to pay my bill. So I see, hey, there's an option to pay via credit card. Hey, I'll take the points, no extra fees. So now I'm set up on a monthly auto credit card, and I mean, that was a huge cluster, I think, to say the least, in terms of we're not collecting late fees, all of that. And now we're going to turn around and hit citizens a year later saying, hey, now that we've got to the new system, we're going to start imposing the fees. So as a citizen, I'm going to have to go back in there and reset up a bank draft, or else I'm going to get hit with the fees. So I guess that's one issue. I mean, that was the direction we gave. I still feel like we shouldn't be paying the fees, But I really wish we could have done that in combination with this big mess we just went through. I mean, because a lot of people don't think about these issues, and now, you know, we've heard a kind of a backlash round one. We're fixing to have round two with the credit card fees, and then looking forward to round three is going to be the meter replacement. I mean, we're going to have either a city crew or a contractor crew out there touching every house. So I don't know. I don't think it changes the budget, but I'd like to see how we're going to communicate the credit card fees, how that's going to be done, how we're clearly going to communicate that in advance. And then also, in terms of the meter replacement, can we do a trial in one or two subdivisions and just really be on top of communication before, during, after, but also maybe do some surveys on the back end to say, hey, well, how'd this go? Because I mean, it's going to be a nightmare, and I hope it's not. But I see the potential to be a nightmare when we're going out and touching everybody's house. So I just thought it was a good time to mention that since they came up during the budget. If we can go back to slide 60. So again, this similar comment as earlier, this is showing the residential comparison. Could we put a slide together showing what it looks like from a few different commercial users? I know a few slides in here we list out, I don't know, a dozen or so commercial. I don't necessarily need that much detail, but just pick a few of them, just so we can get a handle on where we're at there. Because I mean, this shows me that we're the highest around, and now with this new increase, we're going to continue to be the highest around. I just like to see where we are on the commercial industrial side. On slide 68, we go through the traffic improvement fund, and I look at that balance over $500,000. And I look at the CIP and look at citizen comments, and traffic's the number one priority. What can we use those funds for?
Those funds are specific to certain road improvements based on developers' contributions. So they'll be specific to an intersection or a segment of roadway. So when we have a capital project that is going to make the improvement for that, we apply those funds to that. Additionally, when we've collected it in the ETJ or a road that the county's doing adjacent to our jurisdiction, we've done interlocals to pass those funds on to the county to go into that project if the county's making those improvements. So they're specific to certain projects and certain intersections and certain segments of roads, and so have to be applied to those projects as opposed to any general street improvement project.
Okay.
They're the escrows for the pro rata shares and TIAs and things of that nature?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right, well, similarly on the next slide, 69, the park donation fund, what are we limited, or I'm sorry, the park development fund, and we've got almost $1 million in balance there. What are we limited to spending that on?
We can only spend that money in the particular zones where that money was collected. So if there's an improvement within that specific zone that we want to make in the budget year, we can do that.
Okay, does it make sense to start spending some of that? I know on the 5-year CIP, there's some recapitalization planned.
Yes, sir. What we're looking at you do have to pick it up, right? So what we're looking at right now is, traditionally there's been a couple cases that were, I guess, established as the landmarks that would dictated what you could spend development funds on. Those have always been park proper green space developments. There are a lot of cities that have taken and worked within their legal counsel to find out how to redetermine that, to do some recapitalization on vertical type things, and there's some there's some room within the law that we can determine how we define what exactly is parkland and park development. And right now, we're currently working with the legal team to determine how our council feels comfortable doing that. So in short, yes, it is something we're exploring as this number gets larger and larger.
Okay, so is that something we could look at, a budget amendment at some point in the future and pull those funds out of that fund into the general fund to free up some funds in the general fund?
The possibility exists for that. More so right now, it's being pursued for delayed projects that have, that need to take place but didn't fit within the current parameters of a balanced budget. So initially, those would be the projects that I would recommend to ask our administration to present to you. But beyond that, yes, sir.
Okay. All right, similar on slide 70, the municipal channel. When I saw that, I thought we'd see a drawdown in that fund balance for the city hall renovations, that we're gonna be able to use some of those funds. But it looks like that balance is just continuing to grow.
Yeah, the revenue that comes in exceeds what we can actually spend on that. Believe me, we spent as much money as we possibly could on the renovation out of that PEG channel, but it can only be
I believe you.
It can only be used specifically for public notification, public information through our channel. So we'll use it when we can, and we have.
So this budget's the largest, I guess, in my opinion, one of the largest budgets that we could have used it, and we're only using about roughly less than half. And maybe for a follow-up white paper, kind of outlining, I don't know if legal has to opine to what we can spend those funds on, but I'm still getting calls and texts in the middle of a meeting saying, hey, we're not seeing, when we were televised, either Comcast or AT&T, or the internet's still not working right. So I hate to still be getting those complaints, knowing that we've got a balance here that's continuing to grow. So I'd just like to see some follow-up on that and what we can spend it on to see if we can rectify those issues. Slide 90, well, probably 78 is fine. I'm sorry, let's go to 93. Basically, so we've got, in the sources of funds, we've got a 2019 bond referendum coming out. But yet, when we look at 93?
Be off by 2 because of the slides we added, right?
So it'll be 95.
Your CIP sources somewhere.
There we go. So we see here that our new proposed GO bonds kind of start coming online in 19. But then we look up at the CO line and see that we're continually issuing COs in 19, 20, 21, 22. Why wouldn't we bring those projects down essentially out of non-voter approved debt and take the opportunity when we're going out for a future bond referendum to essentially get it to be voter approved, to get input from the voters?
It'd be council's policy decision, but the COs have traditionally been used for things like the fire station construction and all the other things that you've seen. And so I assume the thought has been that those are necessary requirements and debt finance those with the COs versus putting it to the question. So that if and when that time comes, it'd be the choice, but that'd be my assumption of the logic passed.
I'd like at least to have that discussion. I don't know that it changes the budget, but as we get closer to this bond referendum, it might make sense on the front end to have that discussion to get council's input. But if we're going out for a bond, I'd at least like to put it forward to the voters. On slide, I believe it's going to be 88. There's a placeholder for a multimodal master plan. What is that?
that encompasses an update to the thoroughfare plan, bike plan, trail plan, as well as sidewalk. So it takes a look at all of those different modes and sees where, and looks at where we have gaps and where we need to expand those different things and connect those different things together. Is there any-
Yeah, council would also set forth a plan to get those implemented over time. As has been mentioned many times, is on a gap analysis on sidewalk, and those sidewalk funds have always been tied up to trip slips, repairs of that nature. So this would help set forth a priority, then we're able to come back to you, council, to set that priority.
Okay, I guess I'll still be around when that comes up, but I don't know whether I'm convinced we need to spend $400K on it. And I'm sure we do. I'm sure y'all will get me there, but that leaves me scratching my head. On slide 94, we talked about the screen, the bar screen. So we're spending 1.7 million to save a crew that goes out there twice a month to remove the floatables. Do those numbers make sense? I mean, what's the life of that? And I mean, we can pay a crew twice a month for several, maybe even decades, to go out and pull the floatables off for 1.7 million.
There's also more to that when you're looking at that as well, is that'll tie that crew up from being able to do any other maintenance associated with the sanitary sewer system itself, to move out and go out and clean the sanitary system, also clean out manholes. It would tie that crew up to do this. This also then would take a look at providing my glasses work. Allow a lot of this material that we get coming down to be disposed of and collected prior to that as well. Because if anything happens in a lift station, if we don't get there and clean those floatables, it can turn on the floats that are in there and either run the system dry and potentially damage pumps, or the floats could stay locked down and not kick the pumps on as well. So that's why this crew is constantly out there. And I may be emphasizing it's only one or two. It could be more than that. But like I said, it diverts them from other areas, and this would then help continue to maintain that system. And considering, go ahead.
I was going to say, someone from Public Works may be able to help us out on this, but I think we also use some contracted Vector truck services as well on top of our crews at times when we have buildup in that part of the system.
Actually, it's done by a contracted service. It's done once to twice a month. It costs anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 to do. Basically, when we talk about floatables, it's like a thick mat of grease, and it's a lot to suck out. So basically, what happens is if that is a constant issue at that plant, that wear and tear on those pumps in that lift station reduces the life of those pumps. Then when it goes through the system, we have another fine bar screen. That is also working harder than it needs to. So what we're trying to do is not have all these chain reaction of reduced life. So this is intended to reduce that on the front end.
All right, thank you.
What are the size of the pumps on that station?
Now I need to get back to you.
And then on slide 104, the assumptions used for the multi-year plan, and kind of back to a prior comment in terms of the comp and class, if, I guess in round figures, somewhere, or not in round figures, somewhere I saw it said we're going to try to get to 100% in 2 years. But I think it's going to take closer, at this 150K, it's going to take closer to get, it's going to take 3 years to get there, just off some rough numbers. And the way I see it, that's going to be 3 years from now, we're going to be getting to 100% of market that will then be 3 years prior. So whether you want to address it now or we can address it the next meeting, I guess I'd like to figure out what the plan is around that. And that's all my comments for now, Mayor.
That does, okay. Go to Councilmember Reed. You have any wisdom to share with us?
I think Councilman Carbone has quite a bit, so.
You just about covered everything, huh?
Yes, sir.
Good. Clay, I just wanted to inject a perspective at this point. We have a tendency to compare our water rates or other types of rating with other cities, and we've listed Pasadena, Friendswood, League City, and Sugar Land. And when you stop and think about it, Sugar Land's built out. Friendswood is pretty well built out, and it will be pretty soon. Pasadena just about built out. And League City is nearing build out. I mean, expansion footprint. We have 48 square miles of our 70 square miles that most of this is pertaining to when we talk about our budget. Is it possible that we could have maybe a chart that would help us sort of put this into perspective? When they build out, they're going to have population, it's going to stop, you know, they probably stop. Ours, with this footprint that we have left, we're going to grow some more population base, and that's why our numbers get bigger than our companion cities. Is it possible we could have a potential population growth or population footprint, and that we could kind of put this in a little better perspective when we compare water rates for the future and things of that type?
We can certainly give it a shot, and it's probably a factor. The other thing that comes to mind too is, a place like Sugar Land, as I understand, been told, they actually had a surcharge on the utilities for surface water, building up to building some of their infrastructure. So we're kind of doing we've in the position of doing the opposite of, taking that as we're going along right now and taking that hit. So they, I've been told, built up a balance. So, and, you get mud districts into those and it complicates things further. But, obviously we don't want to be at the top on that, and do everything we can to keep the costs down, but there's realities of where we take our water, the costs we have to pay for that, the chemicals, electricity, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a growing plant, and we're also going to look at trying to sell water to neighboring jurisdictions to defray and spread out that cost, and do everything we can there. So we'll try to get some more information on those comparisons, but hear you.
I think water will become more of an issue as cities grow because of the lack of available water sources.
Yeah, and
we're fortunate in that respect,
and credits were due. I think councils before have secured water rights so that we have an ample supply. I mean, we're not looking at having to have restrictions. We're looking to try to build more so we can sell more, and balance out where we're taking our water from, trying to lessen where we get more expensive City of Houston takes, and get our own surface water where it's going to be less expensive. You've seen those tables in the past.
Yeah. I hate for us to compare to other cities that are going to be locked in, and which, when they're locked in, the population growth stops. And it's hard to sell a rate increase sometimes when you say, we're still expanding. They're not. They have built out. That's what it's going to be for them for years in the future. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in before I asked Keith Ardno to tune in on this.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to second previous council's involvement in water and the fact that we have put the investment into the future of our water supply like we have. It's a big number. It scares me every time I see it, but it's one of those things. I think 20 years from now, we're all going to look back and be very happy that that we made that investment and that we don't have the water issues that every study I've seen show moving forward in Texas as we grow. So very happy about that. Yeah. As the only other thing that really came up that is I don't know, something that bothers me in general. I personally have no problem passing along those credit card expenses. I wish all businesses were allowed to. I view my use of a credit card as a benefit to me, not a benefit to the merchant. I don't understand the rules and regulations out there saying that a business can't do it. Honestly, it bugs me because a lot of them won't take my American Express card because of the higher fees. I know there's a higher fee, pass it on to me. I would rather use that card. The other aspects that happened with the movement to the systems, that was my pet peeve when I got on, is we had not looked at our software systems here in the city in a very long time. I looked at other local governments around, and they had changed over 2 or 3 times when the city was still using the same systems. And that does make it more difficult to transition. And I want to thank staff for that project. It was a huge project. I think we're seeing benefits of that throughout the city. The support I see for IT among staff is getting to where I think it should be. We're in information age today. There's not one staff member in here that doesn't use a computer and doesn't use that technology and that backbone. Again, another major project. Could it have gone smoother? Yes, it probably could have. I hope we don't wait the 3 lifetimes of software that we did before we look at this again, because it's just an ever-changing, honestly, and I've heard it used several times in the school district, and it's even a larger money pit there, but IT is a money pit. We will continue to throw money into IT, but I can't come up with a better solution. We need that. Our residents are going to ask for it moving forward. So overall, the CIP is getting us where we need to be. I can't wait to see this bond issue. I won't be up here. I do caution everybody. I've lived through the 2007 bond issue, even though I really had nothing to do with it, because of the fact that this body decided at some point, we're just going to stop building the projects, and we're going to push them off. And I mean, the Shadow Creek Park is a perfect example of something, in my opinion, that should have been started months after the bond, and we waited 7 years. I don't want to see us do that again. If a bond is the direction we go out, I want to see a plan to get those implemented as quickly as possible, because the public's memory is very short. I sat on the chamber board when they supported the 2007 bond issue. I sat on council when they came up and did not support the spending of those same dollars 7 years later. So it makes life hard when projects are pushed back. But as the mayor continues to say, we are a growing city. We're very proud that we're a growing city. And we need to embrace that. Our residents need to embrace their government and let us know what they want. I've had very few tell me I want less. It's normally I want more yesterday, and here's how you should do it. So I hope during that bond issue, the process of planning for that bond issue, that we can get more input than we have in the past, and move the city forward in the right direction. But again, the surface water treatment plant, big, and it's going to pay off for us in the long run. And I just want to thank staff that's worked on that, and previous councils that bit the bullet and moved forward, and the current councils I've served with that have continued to support that project.
Rose?
Thank you, Mayor. Let me just go through the CIP questions I had, or comments I had real quick. And belabor it. We're getting pretty close to lunch. So on the CIP project, we have the West Side Library, standalone West Side Library program for beginning to look at it, doing a feasibility analysis, probably design development in 19. I'd like to move that up to this year. I'd like to see if we can have a shelf design or a design in process, or if not complete by, early next year, so that we can include that and have it budgeted for the bond election. And also we can start reaching out to the county with budgeted numbers and talk about some areas where they can participate. I think having a standalone library on the west side for the people who live out there, as well as community space, which they sorely lack, is a need, and I'd like to. It's been a need for a long time. I think I'd like to not push that out any further. So if we can get that moved up, get it prepped for potentially a bond election, or maybe funded some other mechanism, and get the design moving, I'd appreciate it. With respect to Councilmember Carbone's comments, I tend to agree with them. I'd like to minimize our use of the CO as much as we can. If we have some program needs that we know we're going to have, let's put that in voter-approved debt as opposed to non-voter-approved debt. I'm not going to. He and I won't share the opinion of how often we should use the CO. I do think it's a necessary tool, but I'd like to use it. Model that as more of an emergent need. We've got a facility, we don't have a bond going out for some time, and we have to be able to fund this, and this is the only, but anything that we can program now, particularly just in advance of a bond that's going to come out in 18 or 19, I think we need to include that in there so the voters have an opportunity to have a say. On the multimodal, we're going to have to continue to push on that. I fully support what we're doing. If I remember correctly, there's been some change in policy from Metro as far as their service outside of their taxing district. So I'm sure that y'all probably reached out to them already or had some conversations. John, I know that you were instrumental in the early process when we were doing the park and ride. So as part of that process, I'm fully on board with us investing the money so we can look at more multimodal solutions and try and pull cars off of the road as best we can and give people other options. As part of that, if we can utilize some resources to start reaching out to them and find out whether we can rehash the park and ride, if that's a possibility, and if there's a desire for us to do that. I know we got burned a little bit the last time, so but maybe rehash that and potentially get that as an option as part of that multimodal program. And that's the end of my comments, Mayor.
Just a quick comment on the timing of the library, is that the timing that you see in the proposed CIP coincides with the end of our current lease that we have in the facility we're in right now. So it's not to say we can't accelerate that, but that's just the basis of the current schedule right now.
I appreciate it. I'd just like to, I hear from a lot of people who live out there. I mean, if we got to pay a little bit on the lease, but we get these people someplace, stay-at-home moms, people who have kids that aren't in school, get them someplace to go where they don't have to travel. That's a community space where they can gather, something that they have sorely lacked. There is nothing out there for them. And I think a library with community space is a need that has not been addressed, and fulfilling that need far exceeds us paying a little bit extra for some retail lease space next to the HEB. my opinion. And I'm positive that that lease space will go. If we ask to break the lease, I'm sure we'll find somebody to take it. Thank you, Trent.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Owens?
Just a couple of things. How much do we charge on people when they move into the city to hook up to the water, the deposit? What is that?
$4,100.
150s off the top of my head. I don't know why I know that or say that, but can we get back to you?
Talking about impact fee?
No, you're just talking about like when you start at an account, you got to put a deposit down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's in the book, Neely's gonna.
it is? Okay. Next, we'll come back to you on that.
Okay, I was wondering, and do we capture that money only within the enterprise system since it is water? Sewer?
So you mean like where we hold that as?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, all right, that's good. I feel like the others on the other bonds, that if it comes up to a sizable number, then I think, we ought to put it in the bond issue to go out, because you continue to see that grow over a period of time, going out to COs or GOs, either one on that. And so I think, with what's been said about it, it's been enough, but I think it needs to be doing that. The one thing, I was on council when we done the 2000 bond issue in the 2007. And I know, like Ardno said, that, wish we could have done it in the beginning to come and done everything at one time. But the reason that we done that and put it together like that, we have a schedule that we were gonna do in order not to increase the tax rate. I mean, if we'd come out and sold 157 million in bonds, on the, it would have really seriously impact, and especially in a period of time, 2007, 2008, when it wasn't that great. But, so that was that. On the water side of looking at it, and I think, I came in front of council a long time after I left to speak about that, on that, we looked at 10% increase in 16 and 15 and 17 and 10 and the other. So we're looking at, eking up on about a 40% increase, in our water on there. But I know that a lot of it is based upon the money that we got in order to build the service plant. But I'm not too sure. I know, Clay, you said something about having the water that we needed, but we do have water rights, but our water rights are not senior liens. They're junior liens. And one of the things that I have talked to the county about when they're going to come in for the subsidence district, and they said, never, we're not going to do that. So, I mean, people are going to continue to drill water wells in Missouri County. So, but I think, that's, it's on its way, and when we, on previously, we did get the land out there, because it does, the last two studies that we done, it came up to the same location where the water plant should go to on there. But on the Metro side of things, I know that Metro has had a letter in their existence from the federal government for about a year, maybe a year and a half now, that says that they're not going to continue to get a whole lot of money out of the federal government, but for Metro. And so they're telling them that they have to go outside the service area in order to be able to do things that they want to do. And so that letter's been sitting there from the federal government for, I guess, about a year, maybe a year and a half so far on that. But, so, I guess the only other thing, too, since we got back, I don't know how many Vector trucks we got. One?
Vector trucks?
Yeah.
It's one Vector truck and then one Gap Max.
Okay. I've always been, when I was on council, that as we come into hurricane season, I always like to see that truck out cleaning inlets out. And I mentioned that to Clay the other day, that, that people get out and not the people that own the houses, but it's people that come in and mow the yards. And I've stopped a couple of times out there and told people, hey, quit blowing that stuff in the damn inlet. I mean, you know, so, I mean, it builds up and it hurts us, and we're looking out right now that probably one of the most active hurricane seasons that we've had in a number of years now. And a lot of areas, you know, if the water doesn't flow or if it's backed up through there when we start getting these in, I mean, we're gonna see a lot more flooding again. So I'd like to see us have at least a good program to go in these areas, especially in residential areas where you have a lot of trees and stuff and leaves fall off in the air, and where people mow in the yards, blow all the grass and stuff in the inlet instead of blowing it up, you know, putting it in a bag to be hauled off, so. And I guess that's probably about everything I have right now. I think those things have been discussed up and down.
Good, appreciate your comments.
Quick answer to your thing, the deposit for a water account for, if it's owner occupied, is $100, and if you're a renter, it's $185.
And for commercial, it's 200. It's 200 for commercial.
So that stays in the enterprise fund, right?
That's
It's not moved
correct.
out.
That's correct.
And the impact fees that we have for commercial and stuff, that stays within the enterprise system.
Yes, sir. And I wanted to mention one other thing. We have been in contract specifically with Metro regarding their new policy. And yes, they have changed their policy where they will provide service outside of their service area. And they will charge you for that service outside of their service area. One other thing that I wanted to mention to council, we'll be bringing back some information to you probably during the first quarter of this new year with some options that you can consider regarding service, bus type service, specifically park and ride type service. In order for that to occur, it's going to cost an annual amount of money, but we'll bring some options to you this first quarter so that you can look at that. I just wanted to let you know we have had conversations with Metro, and we're looking at that issue.
I know at one time when we looked at it, we actually increased the fare by $1, I think, in order to cover a lot of that service. And then we had the facility there, but we had commercial stuff there at the facility, you know, and so that was part of it also. Maybe you ought to get them to bring the rail down.
Okay. Thank you. Our charter requires that we have at least 6 people present for a quorum. I'm going to lose one at 12 o'clock, so we have a time constraint on us. Clay, next item is next step, and then I've got a public comment.
Mayor, can I take a 5-minute break?
Yeah. You'll take a 5-minute break?
Yes, sir. We need a real short break.
Real short break.
Take a 5-minute break at, is that 11:28?
There's no cover in front of us.
We also have from Fletcher Bay, add those together, you're in the
Let's get that together. But, so how much money does it take to do that? Is it 150,000? And I know it moves.
You got 2 minutes and 35 seconds left.
Right, but just for the discussion, so everything stayed the same. What would that, how would that occur? What does it take to get us that full implementation of the?
No, one of our projects is come and go.
Council, let's return to open session at 11:45. John, we need to move to the next item, which is next steps. Where'd Clay go?
We got two deputies and one assistant here, they can do
I'll
it.
say John will.
I think the next steps were the chart previous to that, wasn't it, John Carver?
Yes.
It's in this presentation.
I think that's the next.
Could talk about the city manager's budget at this time.
Going down.
Says next steps, and so you want
So
to
I can do
present
my-
that for us?
I'll do my best Clay impression here. So where we're at right now, I think we got the feedback that we needed on the tax rate to set the table for the 21st. We will have another formal budget discussion, number 2 of 3, coming in. You want to take the time?
Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Budget discussion number 2 and 3 on the 21st, and importantly, vote on that maximum tax rate. So we'll have that prepared and ready to go. We'll move to discussion number 3 on August 28th. We'll look ahead to 2 public hearings that take place in September before the first and second reading of the ordinance for the tax rate, the budget and pay plans, and the fee updates. And then the resolution for the CIP will be on the agenda for September 25th.
Okay, thank you, Clay.
So, as mentioned, we got our website that we'll continue to put materials as we go along. We've captured all the items. I think, member Reed mentioned he might have one other thing, information request.
Okay.
Yes, just briefly, I wanted to see or get more information on us adding an additional associate judge. I've spoken with our head municipal judge and then also the associate judges that we have right now, and I don't think it won't have a budget impact, but we'd essentially be adding another person to help out on the weekends, and so I'd like to see us add some information on that to our upcoming discussions.
Sir. So then, Mayor, I think we're done, and there was an item for people present, if you wanted to let that happen.
Okay. Good. And then for the comments from council, before I move to the 2 individuals who'd like to make a comment. One of them is John Despain. John, thank you for being here today. We still have a 12 o'clock constraint, but that's all. Thank you.
John Despain, 2555 Cullen, and I apologize to some, because I said yesterday and days prior that I would not be speaking today, but after hearing some of the stuff I heard today, I changed my mind. All this morning, we have heard accolades to city staff and employees for all their work. And I might add, all the work on the city budget and everything, which they've done a great job. I may add about all these city employees who work every day for this city, who make this city what it is. And that's why I'm up here speaking for all the city employees. Last time I spoke to city council, I had employees coming up to me afterwards thanking me for speaking up for them. The employees who make this city what it is. Employees are frustrated. Some are demoralized. After today, hearing some of the comments that I heard, they interpret it as they are not even worth average pay. That's what they hear. All the yes buts, all the excuses, the employees don't hear that. They hear they are not worth average pay. Midpoint, whatever you want to call it, that's what they hear. If you take a look at the number of employees who have left the city over the last couple of years, you can make all the excuses about why they left. But the point is, employees are leaving this city to go to work elsewhere. I can point out employees who left to go to work for Friendswood, for League City, for Sugar Land. Whatever excuse you want to make to better their lives, whatever, they left this city to work elsewhere. Another, referring back to the comments, and Councilman Ordno, you and I agreed on 2 things today. And for us, as long as we've gone back and forth, That is unusual. What you mentioned about short-term memory, I'm going to address that in a little bit. But we agree on things. Councilman Orno, I agree with you 100%. There needs to be a plan. There isn't a plan, and it's all based off of 2016 numbers. So there needs to be a plan. What I would like City Council to do is consider the employees. Let them know their worth average. On the 21st, there's going to be quite a few employees here listening to what is going to be presented. They're going to be listening to what y'all are saying. Let them know their worth average. And I sort of got off script here, and I was cautioned that whenever I get off script, things blurt out, and it's like Trump and tweets whenever I go off script, but I've gotten off script just a little bit. One thing I want to remind you, and some of you city councilmen weren't here when the comp presentation was made, it was said right here, the 92.5 and the 95% is not recommended for employee retention and employee morale. And what do we have presented? 95%. It's in the presentation. But we're going against what was recommended. I don't understand it. So, since I'm on a time constraint, I'm going to leave it at that, and thank you very much.
Good. Appreciate your comments. Thank you. And we also have another citizen, not another citizen, but a citizen, Buck Stevens. I saw him back there somewhere. There he is. Buck, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I appreciate it. My name is Charles Buck Stevens. I live at 4701 West Orange in Pearland, Texas, and have lived in Pearland for 50 years. I just wanted to bring in an analogy, and I also agree with Councilmember Ordino on several occasions, and it's good to have good dialogue, and I think that's great. As a relatively active person in Pearland, and involved in your Parks Board, several other fractions amongst the city. As a citizen, I'm very proud of what we have, and I appreciate the good stewards that you've been and other councils have been previous to this, and making sure that we hit dead eye. And I know management has a hard time trying to convince you that these things need to happen, and also that and I know it's your obligation to go up and represent the citizens. But I take pride in living in Pearland, and I think it's time that we're going to have to look at, hitting some pocketbooks. It's just the way it's going to have to happen if we ever want to get ahead of where we are. I'm tired of being told that things are getting cut out of projects that we've approved over time because we don't have enough money. Things get over, they came in over budget. So we have to continually cut things that end up being added to future budgets, which cost more because years go by and prices go up. It's about time that when we budget for something and we project something, that we try to stay on task and get it done ahead of time. I agree with all the sentiments about if we're going for another bond issue, it needs to have a timeline put into it and held to it and get done. We extended this last one so long, and it's cost us so much, and we've cut out so much that now has to be made up somewhere else. It's ridiculous. I also want the council to consider some things that I didn't hear anything, and I realize projects probably have some of these on their radar. I think Bailey Overpass needs to occur. I know that one's already been talked about. I know that we've done a good job on Bailey, but it actually does go to nowhere still. You go into a 2-lane road that has no way to relieve all of its congestion right there at that corner. So Bailey Overpass needs to occur, I know the EDC put a lot of funding into it early on, got a lot of it, infrastructure there now. It needs to be completed so that that Bailey Road does act as a good purposeful road. It takes care of us, the citizens of Pearland, not worried about everybody else going through us or around us. You know, Veterans, Harkey, Old Alvin South, all of those roads need to be looked at. Those are old roads, they're being dilapidated. I heard you say that we don't have enough money to take care of the roads we have now, much less reconstruct and build, and some of those may be on the way future, but I didn't see them in this presentation, but I think they need to be brought to the forward and don't react to it and be proactive to that. I'm also going to ask that the council consider some projects like the skate park. I'd like to see a skate park put in place. I would like to see that considered in the bond election. It's not a cheap and inexpensive project. Our seniors is another thing that's not being addressed. We have that senior NAP center is being utilized to its capacity, and we need to be thinking about the other sides. I call them ends of Pearland, not sides of Pearland, but ends of Pearland that need to be thinking about senior outdoor activities and et cetera. An outdoor pool. We need to be looking at that. A lot of people use it. And I like the analogy of the Starbucks system. You know, if a person buys a $5 Starbucks, which I think they're actually more expensive than that, it's going to cost them, $108 a month to buy Starbucks. And it's only, if you go to the rollback rate, it's only going to cost you $16 a month. And so I realize there's an appraisal issue in there, but we can't do much about that. That's a county level thing. But I just think that we need to be looking to the future and just up the ante and get things done. Thank you.
Good. I appreciate your comments on that. Clay, you have any wrap-up comments for us?
No, sir. We'll see you on the 21st for budget and see you again Monday night for a regular meeting.
That it?
Yes, sir.
Wow, good. Thank all of you for being here. You're fabulous people. Thank you so much for what you do. Pearland is special because of you. I will adjourn this special meeting, City Council, at 11:57.